Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LPL Week 3 overview and analysis video, and then of course at the end, my updated power rankings. The LPL has been pretty wild up until this point, this split. Not a crazy amount of upsets, but certainly some teams that are over or underperforming expectations, especially record-wise early on in the split, and especially with this condensed schedule with these weeks being so long, you really got to get out to a hot start because you don't have as much time towards the back half of the split to be able to rebound. And so week 3 already, we're starting to get a pretty good idea of where teams are going to fall. But I want to know what you guys thought down in the comment section below. What teams are overperforming your expectations? What teams are underperforming your expectations? You know I love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback. Let me know if you're excited down in the comment section below. But of course, with the LPL, we've got so many series to get into. 19 best of 3s every single week to talk about in this video. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Of course, if you are new here, what we do on the channel is go through every single series that happened in the LPL in week number 3, talking about the positives, the negatives, the advantages, the disadvantages that each team was able to put out. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for every single best of 3, and then at the end of the week, I'll be giving my updated power rankings as well as a player of the week and a dud of the week. So again, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into day number 1, and we kick day 1 off with a pretty intriguing matchup between two teams that are kind of moving in opposite directions. We had ThunderTalk Gaming taking on Ultra Prime, and Ultra Prime actually is going to be able to take this series 2-1, which is a really nice victory for them. It was not something that I was particularly expecting to see here. ThunderTalk, obviously a team that has not meshed well together at all, at least to start this summer split. There's been so much turmoil, mostly off the Rift, but also a little bit on the Rift as well, and a team like Ultra Prime that has definitely been better than I think people gave them credit for, me included, at the start of the split. So let's go ahead and talk about it. I really did like what we saw out of Ning in this series, which I think is going to be surprising to quite a few people because Ning has developed a little bit of a bad reputation over the course of the year, and a lot of that is well-deserved. A lot of the games that he has played where he loses are horrendous. They are just really, really bad, but I do want to defend him a little bit and just say that I think his ability to be more of a feast or famine jungler is a little bit underrated. I think a lot of people just see the famine, and especially in spring, it really was not good. He was one of the worst players in the league, but Ultra Prime was probably the worst team in the league, and so that's going to happen every once in a while. But I still think when Ning is able to get ahead in the early game, he can be a very dangerous player to play into, which we saw towards the back half of the series. The Poppy game was fine in game number 2, but it really was the Kindred game in game number 3 that is going to get him this player of the series award, and this isn't the first one that he's gotten this split. That's 3 series wins now for Ultra Prime, kind of hard to say that, and he's gotten player of the series in 2 of those. So yes, I understand that Ning has also been a big problem for this team, especially when they're losing. He was my dud of the week in week number 2, not just of a series. In my opinion, he was the worst player in the LPL last week, but he is still going to have some moments, especially against a team that is really struggling, like TT on the other side, where he can show up and actually be a relatively good player. And then he was far from the only one. I thought Harry actually had a great series in the top lane, and he's starting to show a lot more. I was not super convinced in spring. I know a lot of people had high hopes for him and said good things about him. I thought his laning was a little bit weaker than people were giving him credit for him. He wasn't that difference maker in team fights, but how much of that is the fact that the rest of the team isn't very good? It was just hard to get a good read on him and what he would be able to do, but I didn't have a lot of confidence that it was going to happen in 2023, but he had a really good series here. He just outplayed Hoya basically at every turn. He had a phenomenal game number 2 on the Gnar, and the Cassante is just a huge pick. Like, that champion is just so ridiculously strong, and he really was doing a lot in game number 3 as well. And so it's really good to see him stepping up and continuing to play well. Forge was really good in game number 2, creating a lot for the rest of the team on the Annie. That champion can sneakily deal a lot of damage. I know we know that Annie can deal damage, but sometimes I think we all look at her as like set up for, the Zeri or another hyper carry. And I think, Forge kind of showed that, no, you can actually carry games as the Annie, especially if you're moving around the map a lot as well. And then Doggo and Sword Art have just generally been good, I would say, over the course of this split, which is definitely a positive. I said that Doggo was the best and most consistent player on this team. I absolutely still stand by that, and Sword Art is playing much better than he did in spring for anyone's legend, and that, in my opinion, is also very good to see. Basically, everybody on Ultra Prime across the back 2 games actually playing pretty well, and so relatively good sign from them. This team might be better than like a bottom 3 team, which is what I think we all kind of projected them to be. And then for ThunderTalk on the other side, like, everything is just going wrong. There really is not a lot of positives to say. One positive, Beishwan was really good in game number 1 on the Vi, creating a lot of action. I know people really want to see Zhao Huanggren, and I think at this point, obviously, it makes a lot of sense. This team seems to just not have any sort of chemistry, but I don't think Beishwan is a bad player, and I've said that multiple times. Like, the desire to see Zhao Huanggren should not overshadow the fact that Beishwan is still probably an LPL caliber jungler. I understand he did not have a very good back half of the series. I'm not going to entirely defend him, but he's going to have good games. He's going to have quite a few of them. He had a lot last split, and he was really good in 2022, and so I still like him a bit as a player, even if he's relatively inconsistent. And then done of the series for me is going to go to Hoya in the top lane. Like I said, Harry had a really good series on the other side, and Hoya was kind of the victim of that. He was really outplayed a lot towards the beginning part of this split, and even in this series, right, it's just not been a great start to the year for Hoya, and I think he's getting exposed a little bit more now that the team around him isn't quite as dominant in the early game. You know, last split, Beishwan and Yukao were really dominating the jungle mid-duo matchups, and they were able to kind of push forward in that, and Huanfeng and Yao Yao had super pressure in the bot lane, like they were always winning 2v2, and so Hoya didn't really have to absorb all that much pressure, but now I think a little bit more onus is placed on him. The veil is kind of lifted on this ThunderTalk team, and I think Hoya as a player is definitely struggling a little bit more than I think he would have wanted to, but 1xN and Yao Yao are fine. 1xN's a good team fighter. I like him as a player. I think Yao Yao is a good player as well, but, you know, I still think Huanfeng would be better in this lineup. I still think he's a better starter than 1xN for a team that is trying to win right now. Now, if you're looking towards the future, if you're not trying to win right now, then 1xN might be the option, right? Because the upside is there. You know, I know a lot of people are really excited about him, but he's just not a better player than Huanfeng is in 2023, and so that's, I would say, relatively fair to say. And then I think Yukao is just good. He's probably the best player on this team, even if he didn't necessarily show it all the time in this series. And so ThunderTalk definitely needing to bounce back a little bit here. They've started the year 1-4 as a team that probably wanted to get into playoffs. I moved them out of the playoffs in my power rankings last week, and they could fall even lower now that they're losing to teams like Ultra Prime. And then for Ultra Prime on the other side, this team is fine. They're going to be able to beat teams that are struggling and not necessarily super consistent. Their schedule has been relatively weak to start the split, but they've already shown that they do have a little bit of a ceiling, and I don't really think a series like this changes my mind on that all too much. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1. It's a top of the table versus bottom of the table clash between Bilibili Gaming and anyone's legend that predictably BLG is going to be able to take. This team has just been absolutely on fire ever since the playoffs. At MSI, they were fantastic. Back in the LPL, they have been basically unstoppable, and I don't really see any reason for that not to continue. This team is just working. Every single one of these players plays incredibly well, not only individually, but especially off of each other, and I really think a lot of them are playing the best league that they have played maybe ever, especially like the bot side of this map. We'll get to Bin in a little bit. He was maybe the one exception, not exactly having the best start to the LPL split. He's been a little bit rough in a couple of games, but man, the rest of this team more than makes up for that with how they are playing right now. I've talked a lot about June to start this split. I think he's been the most consistent player on BLG, at least to start summer, but man, the Yagoat showed up against anyone's legend. Yagao is going to easily be the player of the series here against AL. He absolutely dominated. He's maybe the best and most consistent Annie player in the world. Like, he really just dominates on this champion like almost nobody else is able to do, and I know that that's kind of a crazy thing to say. How can you dominate on Annie? You know, the champion doesn't really have a lot of crazy mechanics, but what it does take advantage of is really good macro and really good positioning, and that's what Yagao has always done better than almost any other mid laner in the world. It's what made JD Gaming so difficult to beat last year, was Yagao just being exactly where he needed to be over the enemy mid laner at all points in time, willing to sacrifice his own lane to be able to get things done. In this series, though, he didn't really have to sacrifice anything. He was the better mid laner in lane, and he was certainly the more interesting and more dynamic laner in terms of moving around the map, and so this is basically peak Yagao. He's been in fantastic form, and I'm really happy to see that continue. He was also really good on the Jace in game number 3, like, definitely player of the game in game number 3 as well. It wasn't just the Annie that he was really good on. He's just a very versatile and good player who has consistently flown under the radar for his entire career, and it's another one of those things that I just will never understand. Yagao has been fantastic for a long time, and I'm glad to see that he is starting to get some of the credit for that. Elk and On continue to be very good, even if they're not the focal point carries for this team. On is just spectacular. I mean, the dude might be be the favorite for MVP right now through the first couple of weeks of the LPL split. He has been unreal in terms of what he's been able to put out in the support position. He's so aggressive, able to create so much for the entire team. Him and Yagao and June and Elk all play off of each other so well. He continues to play great. Elk is a fantastic main carry for this team, but he didn't have to be in this series, which just makes them even more dangerous, but definitely the better bot lane. June continues to be very good in the jungle. Again, another player who I think has to be in the MVP conversation early on in this split. He's been so consistent for BLG. The one negative is, of course, going to be Bin on the top side, who honestly just got outplayed this entire series, was definitely a little bit of an anchor for BLG, but, you know, he's still going to be able to contribute some positive plays. It's just kind of the consistency of those positive plays that might be a little bit more up and down than you would like to see from a player like him, but when Yagao and On and June and Elk are playing this way, like, this team is just not going to lose, especially to a team like AL. And then for AL on the other side, couple of positives, couple of negatives. The negative, first and foremost, Ji Choi is back into the bot lane. He's going to be playing over iBoy. I like this a little bit more. Again, I don't think iBoy gives you a ridiculous amount of upside. He just has not been very good in recent years. And, you know, Ji Choi, I think, has shown some interesting things at this level, but he wasn't very good in this series, especially in that game number 1 on the Lucian. He's going to get my dud of the series. I don't really know what this team is going to do with their bot lane. I like Zora as a player, and honestly, he does show a bit of promise as a more aggressive player, as somebody who can win in the 2v2 early on, but obviously going into Elkanon is not an easy task in the early 2v2, and this bot lane was just not going to be able to hold up against that. If they can figure out what they want to do for their AD carry position, I think that's going to put this team in a much better spot, but the positives for this team actually come in on the top side. I thought top side was really fantastic for AL in this series because they were going up against a good team. Now, did they win all the time? No, but, like, did they look good? Absolutely. ZDZ and Xiao Hao continue to be pretty interesting pieces. It's not a secret how much I like Xiao Hao as a player. I said that if he was on, like, a top 5 or 6 team, that people would consider him a top 5 or 6 jungler, and I truly do believe that. I think he has the talent right now to be in that conversation. He's just not, unfortunately, going to get the opportunity to play like that because of the talent that is kind of surrounding him on this AL team in general, but I still think he's a really, really good player and a positive to AL overall. Definitely the best player that they have, but ZDZ can be a little bit inefficient, a little bit inconsistent. He was really good in this series, though. Honestly, just better than Bin, especially in that game 2 on the Gragas. That win was really off the back of ZDZ and a lot of the plays that he was able to make on the top side. And so really good stuff coming out from the top jungle duo of AL, who had good moments last year as well. It's just the consistency that's a little bit of a problem with them. And then Pins played game number 1 here in the mid lane, and then they switched back to Harder. Harder's been on this roster all year long. He actually played before Pins came in at the beginning of spring, you know, quite a while ago it feels like, but I don't really know what they're going to do here. Harder didn't exactly look better than Pins, and I think Pins has better tape in terms of what he showed not only at this level, but at the LDL level, and so I know what I would do, but I do understand that Pins has not been good to start the split. He's been a little bit of a black hole in that mid lane, not really creating any sort of pressure. Definitely been one of the weaker players in the league up until this point, even if I do think he has a little bit more upside, and so the young players for AL definitely stepping up and showing some things, and I think the established players definitely showing that there is LPL quality talent on this team. It's just BLG is very good. I think if AL was playing a worse team in this series, they probably would have been able to take it, but that was just not the case. And then for BLG, it really does feel like they're relatively unstoppable right now, especially if Bin cannot sandbag some regular season games. He's done this in the past. I'm not going to worry about him. He's never really been a huge regular season performer. He's somebody who's always turned it on a little bit more when we get to best of 5s, when we get to playoffs, and so I'm expecting that to continue to be the case, but the rest of this team is just clicking on a level that I just don't think almost any other team in the LPL is going to match right now, and so if that's like your low point, if that's your floor, that's a pretty damn high floor for BLG. And then moving on to day number 2 now, and day 2 kicked us off with a pretty interesting matchup, one that I was actually pretty excited to see between Ninjas in Pyjamas and OMG. That OMG is going to be able to take in 3 games. We're seeing some pretty close, pretty back and forth series to start the week, and I think this was another one of them. Both teams kind of coming out and proving that they have a lot to show in this split, which is really good to see. I know I've been a little bit critical of NIP in general as a team, and I still think that there definitely are more holes than people give them credit for, but they very much look like a team that could compete for a playoff spot, which is much more than I could say about them last split, and OMG is still OMG. Honestly, they feel very similar to the team that they were in the regular season in spring, a team that pretty consistently is just able to win a lot of games. Remember, this team, I think, was the 4 or the 5 seed heading into playoffs last split. People kind of forget that they were good in the regular season as well, just because they kind of surprised people going on that playoff run, but they were good in the regular season, and they continue to be good, and I think the big positive positive, the big takeaway here for OMG is the fact that my player of the series is going to go to Abel in the bot lane, who I think if you're looking for someone who's been relatively inconsistent, at least to start the split, it probably is Abel. Abel and Cream, I think, are the two players that really haven't been able to step up nearly as much in the summer split as they were in the spring split, but Abel having a really good series here is a really good thing to see, I would say, in general, having that counter pick come out in game number 3 with the Tristana, just something we're not really seeing all that much, especially in the bot lane. Really good to see him be able to pull it out and perform on it. Obviously, you know, Tristana into Aphelios has always been a very Tristana-favored matchup. You're able to farm a lot of plates early game because Aphelios is just not able to fight you, and then you've just got this extra mobility, this extra kill potential in the mid game that Aphelios really doesn't have a way to match, especially if you're already ahead, and so I like that matchup generally speaking, but Abel just played it incredibly well, so much so that he's going to end up getting my player of the series. He was still really good in game number 2 on the Aphelios himself, but he's definitely getting this for game number 3, and then the other player you got to shout out on the side of OMG is Shanji in the top lane, who again just continues to be great. He's the best player on this team, and I don't even think it's really all that up for debate anymore. He continues to just make such an impact in team fights. When you have a Kennen on the top side, you're either going to have someone who is, you know, does pretty well in lane, but doesn't really translate that lead into much else on the map, or you're going to have someone who is like a team fight god, right? Like someone who is completely destroying the enemy backline and creating opportunities for his team that other champions just aren't going to have the opportunity to do, and Shanji is definitely one of the better Kennen players. He's also gotten so much better at weak side top. Like, I know he didn't really have to do that a ton in this series, but when he's given the opportunity to just kind of 1v1, play without resources, play low econ, maybe even a tank on the top side, I feel like he's so much more efficient than people give him credit for. Wasn't great in game number 1, but it was certainly good enough to be able to get across the finish line. So Shanji, Abel, definitely the standout players, but Aki, Cream, PP God, basically everybody on OMG played well over the second half of this series. Aki was really the only question mark, but it really was just his game 1 on the Viego that wasn't particularly great. Everybody else, I think, was pretty good in this series, but Abel gonna end up getting my player of the series. And then on the side of NIP, some good and some bad. I actually think that the solo laners continue to be a pretty massive positive for this team, despite what their score lines look like. Angels looks pretty good, and I think he's actually been, you know, maybe the best player on this team. Him and Shadow definitely have an argument against each other for who's been the best across summer split so far, but Angel, I think, has been very consistently good for this team, and he was pretty good in this series as well. But Invincible, like, you look at the 4, 10, and 9 scoreline, especially going like 1 and 5, I think, in game number 3, and you're like, he must have not had a very good game. But if you watch the game, that is clearly not the case. A couple of fantastic engages coming out from the Gragas, but he's just going to get deleted so fast if the rest of the team is not able to follow up on the damage that he's able to do. And unfortunately, by the time he started to get going, OMG was just too far ahead, and there really weren't a lot of plays to make. I still think that when you watch the actual gameplay, Invincible definitely stands out as a player that was really fun and really interesting to watch. But him and Angel, I think, were probably the two most consistent players. Shadow, I think, also was really good, especially in that game 1 on the Vi. It felt like he set everything up for this team. And like I said, Shadow, Angel, like, who's been the best player on this team? Like, you can take your pick. Both, I think, have been really good over the beginning part of this split. But the negatives for NIP, unfortunately, come in the bot lane. And honestly, I think this bot lane's been hugely underperforming in this split. My dud of the series is going to go to Photic, because really, that game number 3, he just got outplayed. It wasn't particularly close. Giving that kind of lead over to Abel on the Tristana just kind of ended the game almost immediately for NIP. And that's a problem. There's really just not a lot that you're going to be able to do about it from that point onwards. And I know people are really high on Photic. I know people like him a lot as a player, and I know I am historically a lot lower on what he's been able to do, and I still see people saying that they have one of the best bot lanes in the LPL, and those people, I just assume, don't watch Ninjas in Pyjamas, because they're just not. Like, not even as a flame to Photic and Juo, there's just so many great bot lanes in the LPL. This is not one of them. They've been pretty inconsistent to start this split, and I'm starting to get a little bit worried. Photic has been surprisingly bad, like even worse than I would have anticipated to start this split, and I do think he has the potential to be able to get back on track, but it certainly has not clicked for him, I would say, in summer split, nearly as much as it did in spring or last year for Victory 5, but again, NIP still has some upside. I think if Jungle Mid continues to play well, and if Invincible continues to grow as a player, I think that this team should be fine. They have way more upside than pretty much any other quote-unquote non-playoff team at the moment, which is why I moved them into number 10 in my power rankings last week, but still, there definitely are question marks, especially if the bot lane is going to be able to solidify. And then for OMG, it's just another nice win. This team isn't perfect, but they've had a really tough schedule to start the split, and they've won every game they're supposed to. They've lost every game they're supposed to, and kind of just trucking along right now. I think if Abel and PP can get a little bit more consistent, I really trust Shanji, and if Aki in particular can get back to the form he was in spring, this team is still going to be a very dangerous proposition to play into, but right now, they just feel like a good team right on the outskirts of being a great team. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and this is a really big matchup on paper, but one of these teams hasn't necessarily lived up to their previous billing in 2023. We have a matchup between LGD Gaming and Royal Never Give Up that JDG is going to be able to take in a 2-0 sweep. And yes, it was a 2-0 sweep, but it was a lot closer, I think, than that would indicate. RNG definitely put up a fight in this series. A couple of players were playing relatively well, or at least were playing relatively aggressive to try to generate some leads, but JDG's talent is just too much. It felt like they were playing with their food a bit in this series, limit testing, if you will, and we'll get to that as we talk about some of the players in particular. But how do you talk about this series and not talk about Ruler? He has some experience beating up on RNG over the course of the last, decade or so, and he really has continued that trend here in the LPL. He's going to get my player of the series for this one. Just a fantastic series overall from him, not only in Game 1, but in Game 2, especially on that Aphelios. We've seen this pick come out a lot over the course of this year from a lot of different players, and in the LPL, it really has not been all that successful. Aphelios is often on the losing end of a lot of these trades, whether it be Xayah, whether it be, we just saw the Tristana, or the Jinx, or basically anything that ends up coming out, Zeri, obviously, but the Aphelios is really not something that has consistently won all that much in this region, and Ruler makes it look like the most broken, busted pick of all time. Like, that is just what Ruler does. He's the most consistent, most aggressive. He's the best at every phase of the game, AD carry in the entire world, and he will continue to be that basically for as long as he needs to. Going into a player like LP, he's going to have a lot of the early game advantage, I would say, and certainly the experience advantage and how to play a lot of these matchups out, and really, he kind of demolished that bot lane. He was just fantastic. His positioning, his mental, basically everything you could ask for from him as a player, he continues to be basically the best at. And then the other player that you really want to give a shout out to is going to be Kanavi in the jungle, who, as good as Wei was, and we'll talk about him, he was pretty good in this series. Kanavi was just better, and he continues to absolutely dominate. That Wukong game in game number 1, really, really fun. It feels like Kanavi is playing the best league that he has played in 2023 right now, which is just so crazy to say because this team did just win MSI, and they did just win the LPL, but I feel like Kanavi wasn't really the person that they were trying to play through, or the player that was getting a lot of attention, I would say, in those series and in those matchups. Right now, it feels like Kanavi is getting a lot of attention. He is, being a big focal point for what JDG wants to do, and I think this team is absolutely bouncing off of him incredibly well. Him and Ruler in particular, I think, have developed a much better chemistry together. Ruler and Missing already had that. Ruler and Knight, I think, developed that very quickly. It feels like Ruler is now getting that with Kanavi, and I think that's really going to unlock a lot of the rest for the team. And then Missing, 369, both were really good. Now, Knight's scoreline looks pretty good here. 2 games of Annie. We know he can play that champion at a very high level, but he was limit testing a bit in this series, as I was kind of talking about, flashing in 1v4, seeing what he's going to be able to do, getting blown up instantly. A couple of team fights that weren't exactly perfect coming out from him, but again, it very much felt like, oh, we're so far ahead. Like, let's go ahead and try some shit, right? He kind of knew that he was going to be able to win the game anyways, and we know that Knight doesn't take, crazy risks in games that absolutely matter, and so I'm not worried about this moving forward, but it is kind of a funny little trend there, I would say, from him. But Ruler and Kanavi were definitely more than enough to make up for any sort of negatives that you could attribute to Knight in this series. And then RNG on the other side were fine. I guess there were a couple of good moments. I think obviously there were moments that they were trying to get back into the game, and I think a lot of that was facilitated by Wei in the jungle, who was probably the best performing member of RNG in this particular series. I know a lot of people are saying that he's stuck in contract jail, and I haven't necessarily disagreed with that. Like, I think that, contract jail is an overused term, especially in esports, where it's like, yes, you play for a bad team. Sometimes that happens, right? Like, I don't want to minimize the plot of a player who gets stuck on a bad team, but, like, sometimes you sign a contract and the team is bad. Like, it just happens every once in a while, and Wei, I do think, is better than the teammates that are around him, but, I think it happens, especially on an org like RNG that you can expect to potentially bounce back, and it's not like this team has been awful to start this split, and so Wei definitely the best performing member of RNG this series, but far from the only one who has shown promise. Breathe, I think, has had a pretty good start to the split, even if he wasn't particularly perfect in this series. He was playing Sion, like, there was only so much he could do, and I think LP certainly had moments. You get the good with the bad with LP, and I think that's really the difference between him and Gala, is I think Gala is significantly more consistent as a bot laner. LP has some pretty high highs. We saw some very aggressive plays from him, but he's also just going to go in and die in some team fights, which we also saw a ton from him. Leading the team in deaths is never a good thing as the AD carry, and that's something that LP has done relatively consistently on both of the teams that he's now played for in the LPL. But my dud of the series is going to go to Lumao in the support position. I like Lumao as a player. I think he gets a bad rap, and I honestly think he started this split relatively well. Him and LP have decent chemistry together as a bot lane, but Ruler needed somebody to pick on, and we had a Blitzcrank in game number 2. If you're not super far ahead as Blitzcrank, that champion is going to look pretty bad, and RNG was able to get behind early, and who are you going to hook? Like, you're going to try to hook the Aphelios, but Ruler positions too well, okay? So now I'm hooking the Ord, I'm hooking the Rakan. If you're lucky, you're hooking the Kha'Zix, but he probably has Edge of Night up, and so there really isn't a lot of opportunities for the Blitzcrank to actually make a lot of plays, and Lumao really was not all that useful in this series. I don't think it's this big grandstanding thing. Like, I don't think Lumao is like this super replaceable support. I think that there are plenty of supports in the league that are worse than Lumao, but wasn't a great series from him, and again, Ruler needed somebody to target early on in games to be able to generate his lead, but overall, RNG is exactly who we think they are. They are a low-tier playoff team, likely. They were able to, at the very least, keep pace and punish JDG's major mistakes that I think maybe some of the bottom teams in the league wouldn't be able to do, but they're not going to be able to compete with this team in terms of talent, and we kind of knew that going into this series, but for JDG on the other side, they're just great. I mean, talent-wise, they're the best team in the world. They've proven it over and over again, and even when they're limit testing, they still are able to come out and beat a playoff team last split 2-0. That is pretty insane, and it just goes to show you the amount of talent that they have on this team. Now we get to move on to day number 3, and we kick day 3 off with another rather predictable series that was absolutely as expected. We had Weibo Gaming taking on LGD Gaming, and Weibo does get the dominant 2-0 win. We talked about a 2-0 series right before this that wasn't quite like the most dominant series you've ever seen. Both games were relatively close, and there were moments where it felt like the losing team could have at least been competitive. That was not the case in this series, especially in game number 2, which was just a massacre. I think it was one tower away from being a perfect game on the side of Weibo, and for Weibo Gaming to be doing that, that's a shock. Like, that makes it immediately surprising. That almost makes it an upset. Obviously, it's not. Weibo should be doing this to teams like LGD, but this is a team that has historically not been good against bad teams and has been really good against good teams. So to see them be good against bad teams is very enlightening because they've already been good against good teams. And so good stuff coming out from Weibo, at least to start this week. My player of the series is going to go to Crisp. First of all, congratulations to Crisp. 5,000 assists in the LPL. That's a crazy amount. The dude is a legend. He's been fantastic. He's a world champion, and so he's gotten a lot of his accolades, but getting that here on Weibo I think was fantastic, and he had a great series. It wasn't just the fact that he passed that record. That game 2 on Nautilus, he was creating so much for this team, just so much pressure around the map coming in from Nautilus, and we're really not seeing a lot of engaged supports come out anymore. I don't think that's because they're bad. I think, again, it's just because I think Enchanter supports are just so strong. Rakan has kind of been the exception to that because of the Xayah Rakan lane, but, you know, we're seeing Pryo on Lulu, seeing Pryo on Milio, seeing Pryo on Yuumi. Nautilus is still really good, and he still does a lot of the things that you want him to do, even in the support role, and so Chris being able to pick him up and play him well, I think was solid. Of course, he was still good in game 1 on the Renata as well. He's just a really good player, and Light and Crisp have been one of the more consistent pieces on this team. Light was also good at following up on everything, but I think he was getting a lot created for him in this series as well, and so gotta give them credit for that. The other player that you gotta shout out, Xiaohu in the mid lane, who continues to be very good. I'm much higher on Xiaohu, I guess, than public consensus. I've seen him pretty consistently ranked a lot lower than like a top 5 mid in the LPL, and I just don't agree with that. I think when you watch a lot of Weibo last split, he was creating so much in team fights for them. There really just wasn't a lot happening for this team. The Shy was often playing from behind. Karsa would have some games where he really did well and have some games where he got absolutely blasted, and Light and Crisp were good, but they weren't dominating lane phase, right? You really needed someone like Xiaohu to step up and position really well and set up the rest of the team, and I think he did that role really well in spring, and I think he continues to be good here in summer. He's basically just been everything this team has needed. Not necessarily a superstar for them, but someone who is more than good enough to be on one of the best teams in the league, and that's, I think, what Xiaohu's kind of been over his entire career, and so not really a big surprise there. And I think the big surprise, the Shy, 0 deaths. That's always a little bit of a scary sight, but something that I think you've got to be at least a little bit proud of. He was going into a top laner who, we'll talk about, was making his debut, didn't particularly play all that well in his debut, but the Shy picking up a solo kill in lane, now that's what I like to see. It certainly has not been a recent thing for him, but definitely good to see him be able to do it. So the Shy, Xiaohu, Crisp, Weiwei, and Light were good as well. I just think those were the 3 main standout players in my eyes from this series. And then for LGD on the other side, they're just bad. Like, they haven't been able to win a series yet. They're not really all that competitive. As good as Meteor has been, he wasn't particularly good in this series, going into a better jungler in Weibo, but really was not able to keep up, and they did make a change in the top lane. Fearness is out, Decade is in. Wasn't super familiar with him, checked and played for WE Academy. Not really a great sign because their top lane situation has been disastrous, and if he's not getting the call in that room, then I don't think he's going to be all that good for LGD, but didn't really get to watch any of his LDL tape. I just got to watch this series, and he just got outclassed. Like, losing to the Shy in laning phase at this point is like a travesty. It's something that just can't really happen, and he got blasted in the laning phase, even on a pick like Cassante, and even on Gnar, like both of those things that you should be able to at least survive the early part with. And so for LGD, not a great showing for Decade to start off his career, but he was far from the only player who didn't play well. Meteor had no pressure on the map, was just completely out-jungled. Jin Zhao continues to be one of the weaker supports in the region, even if I thought he was good up until this point. Maybe not good, but survivable up until this point in his career. This has been like the worst start to a split that he's had in that position, and so Envy's not fixing it. Hai Chao has not been good to start the split. LGD just feels like a team that is in complete disarray, that doesn't really have an identity, and until they figure that out, they're going to be the last ranked team in the LPL. Any sort of cohesion and semblance of, I guess, upward trajectory that they may have generated in spring with Xiaoshu in the top lane is now gone. They don't have any sort of win condition. They don't really even feel all that competitive in a lot of these series, and the 0-6 record definitely kind of plays into that. As for Weibo on the other side, though, they're looking good. Like, I hesitate to say that. I hesitate to try to give some confidence to this team because every time I do, they end up just throwing it away in some random series later in the week. But this team beating the worst team in the league is a very good sign, and doing it in convincing fashion, like, that's not the Weibo that we all know and love. So to see them be able to do it, I think definitely has to inspire at least something in you, but it certainly still has a lot of question marks to figure out. You know, as good as this team is, as talented as this team is, the problem has never been, you know, beating one team one day. It's been being able to consistently beat a lot of teams day in and day out and day in and day out. The consistency has always been the problem. So great series here for Weibo. Glad to see them destroy LGD, but honestly, that's something that they should be doing. And then moving on to our second series of day number 3, and this was one that I think a lot of people were eagerly anticipating with a pretty big debut. We had Edward Gaming taking on Invictus Gaming, and EDG was able to pick up the 2-1 win in the debut of EDG Uzi. We were all really looking forward to this, one of the greatest AD carries of all time, returning to professional play on one of the most historic organizations in the LPL. How could you not be excited about this? At least a little bit, obviously. Uzi wasn't perfect the last time that he was in the LPL, but there were all those rumors and reports of him not being the main practice partner with BLG, with Doggo getting a lot of the reps, and obviously there was so much dysfunction with that team just in general. You really don't know what you can blame on him and what you can blame on the org. So getting him onto an org that we know is going to at the very least put in some of the work here in EDG, I think is a very, very interesting decision. And honestly, he was pretty damn good in his first series back. You can definitely talk about some ups and downs. There were some downs, especially in that game 2 that they ended up losing on Aphelios. A little bit too far forward in some situations, but man, this is a perfect meta for Uzi, where AD carries are the main focal point, and they're kind of allowed to make their own plays. They're allowed to be aggressive. You want to see them, you know, try to be a little bit more active on the map. That's what Uzi really wants to do, and I think he definitely filled into the shoes well. I think obviously playing with Mako is something that's definitely going to help you. You know, it's very rare that playing with Mako is not going to help you because of just how good he is, but I think the bot lane was honestly better than I anticipated it to be. In game number 1 here, you're not going into some slouches. On is a good player, somebody who is relatively solid for this level, and Uzi was the better AD carry in this series, and I think that's definitely going to be a big theme moving forward that hopefully this team can keep up. But was far from the only player on the team who played well. My player of the series is going to go to Jeje in the jungle. Have actually been pretty low on Jeje, at least to start this split. EDG really feels like it hasn't been all that connected, and a lot of that really feels like Jeje not playing towards win conditions as well as you would like to see him, you know, do that. He was pretty fantastic, pretty phenomenal in spring, was arguably the best jungler in the LPL in the regular season, and so we know that he still has it in him. It's not like 2023 has been a bad year or anything for him, just a little bit of a slow start for EDG and for Jeje in general, especially getting that bot lane going going, but this series was a lot better. I think Beishong on the other side, we'll talk about him in a bit, is, relatively decent competition, if not recently, and so, JJ being able to come out and just have a good series, be able to control the jungle, be able to control the pacing of the game, and especially, really execute a high damage pick in a very low damage comp in game number 3. I think that's definitely the most important part. Being put on that Elise with Sion, with Cassante, these are a lot of lanes that are going to set up to try to get the Elise into a position where she can do a lot. And so the responsibility is really on JJ to create a lot of those plays. And I think he did a really good job with that in game number 3. So overall, really like what we saw from them. Uzi and JJ were definitely the standout members, but of course Mako deserves some recognition for making that bot lane look good. Fofo had another pretty decent series. 3 games of Cassante. That's pretty up his alley. He's been very much the AD kind of secondary carry mid laner all year long, whether it be the Jace, whether it be the Cassante. Those are the things he's felt most comfortable on, I think, over the course of the year, so not really surprised to see that. And then Ale, honestly, really liked him in this series. He almost won game 2 by himself on the Aatrox, was like 6-1 at one point, even though he ended the game with quite a few deaths. Just really not a lot that he could do in that situation, and honestly, he played tanks really well in game number 3. He played the Sion well, in my opinion, and so EDG honestly just looking a lot better this week, and I don't know if it's Uzi coming in, I don't know if it's just like this mental reset with having a new AD carry, but this team, I think, feels so much more cohesive right now than they did just a week ago. And then for Invictus on the other side, a couple of substitutions for them as well. Beishong coming into the jungle. They acquired him, I think, like a couple of days before this, and obviously Beishong, somebody who's been really, really good at the LPL level in the past. I compare him to a player like Meteor. I think their career arcs are relatively similar, where both felt like up-and-coming rising junglers on pretty decent teams, and then neither really was able to sustain it. Meteor on, of course, BLG, and Beishong on WE, where things just kind of fell apart and weren't nearly as good. I still think he can be a really good jungler at this level because he's been an all-pro caliber jungler at this level in the past, but this was not a great debut series for him. Obviously, pretty difficult to go into EDG, pretty difficult to go into JJ, but he's going to get my dud of the series here. I just don't think he was nearly as explosive in the jungle matchup as you would have liked here. I also want to point out new top laner Wen in the top lane. He's a psychopath. I mean, this dude is willing to die for kills all the time. That Gangplank game in game number 2 was ridiculously fun to watch. I'm not sure it's optimal for the team, but it certainly was entertaining, and so that's definitely at least a little bit of a positive. Cryan was this team's best player again in this series. He's been a little up and down, but going back to week 1, he was phenomenal in week 1, just wasn't as good in week 2. Really good to see him start out week 3 with a really good performance, even if the team wasn't able to get a win. And then On and Wink were kind of the worst bot lane. Wink is definitely falling down my priority list very quickly in terms of supports. It feels like now that the ADC meta in the support, lane is not quite as dominant or playable, he's definitely fallen off quite a bit. I still have a lot of faith that On as a player, if he has, a good partner, is going to be able to push forward, but I'm very quickly souring on Wink as a player. I don't think he was particularly good in this series, and I don't think that he's been particularly good all split long. He was pretty bad down the stretch of spring as well, and so definitely something to keep in mind. But for Invictus overall, fine series. Losing to EDG isn't bad, especially the fact that you were able to take a game. I think the soul laners are interesting. Obviously, You Should Know Me isn't here. Some people are probably going to ask this in the comments. You Should Know Me is not playing in this series because he's playing for Team Hong Kong on the road to the Asian Games, and so he's a little bit busy doing that right now. And same thing for WE, not playing at all this week. They're also playing on the road to the Asian Games, but Wen is not going to be the full-time starter. He's just the IG youth top laner brought up for a little bit of time, and he's a little bit of a psychopath, but Beishong looks like he's stepping in. For as bad as Tianxian was, I do think Beishong is going to be an upgrade, right? I think he's going to be a little bit more consistent. I don't know if he's going to be this superstar jungler that maybe this team kind of wants him to be from back in the WE days, but certainly an intriguing player, and I like giving him another chance here. And then for EDG, it looked good in round 1, obviously. It's just an Invictus Gaming team, and so not the hardest test in the world with the kind of run that they've been on to start the year, but JJ looking better, Ale looking better, and Uzi and Mako looking like they mesh really well. If everything works out here, and especially if Uzi can get back into form, this team can reach the potential that they were supposed to have before the split started anyways. And then moving on to our third series of day number 3 here, and it really is an intriguing one. These two teams always play each other surprisingly tough, but maybe not this time. We had Top Esports taking on FunPlus Phoenix, and Top Esports gets the job done in 2 relatively clean games. They've looked really good to start the split, which I think is really encouraging for a lot of Top Esports fans out there. People have been saying that this team is just not consistent enough to be ranked in the top 4, to be ranked as a Worlds team coming out of the LPL, but man, you know, recently, I don't know if you can necessarily make that case anymore. They have been fantastic to start this split. They have looked exactly like they should have at the end of last split, and that's really, I think, what we're all looking for. When you have players like Jackie Love and Tian playing the way that they are right now, this team is going to be very difficult to beat, and it feels like the players that weren't playing as well to start the split, or weren't playing as well to end spring in particular, are getting their groove back and definitely starting to get more on the same page. Player of the series for me is going to go to Jackie Love in the bot lane. Really, really, really good series from him. When he's on, when he's playing his best, like, I've said this so many times, but he's right up there with every other AD carry in the world, and this was like a top 1 AD carry performance coming out from him. Like, there are very few games where I just go, that's the best AD carry in the world for anyone. Like, you know what I mean? There are very few players that have that kind of impact on the game. Jackie Love had that kind of impact on the game, both in Game 1 and in Game 2, but especially in Game number 2 on that Aphelios. It's just really fun stuff coming out from him. He's going up against LWX, who, yes, I am a little bit lower on, but I still value him as a decent bot laner, and Jackie Love made him look like a complete scrub in this game, and so really, really good stuff from him. Easy choice for player of the series, and he has been white hot to start this split. Again, I know I've talked quite a bit about, like, early MVP favorites. Jackie Love is in that conversation, if not number 1 right now in the entire league in that conversation. Tian has also been pretty fantastic for this top esports team to start the split. Those are the 2 players that I think you really have to look for and say, like, wow, like, you two are working together at an incredibly high level. Tian, obviously a really streaky player, but right now it's a hot streak, and that's really all that matters. As long as he can maintain that, you know, it's going to be fine. If you're getting the good side of Tian, you're going to be in a relatively good spot. I just think that maybe some of his cold streaks are a little bit underblown, if you will, in the grand scheme of things. But really, the thing that has turned top esports around, in my opinion, is the other 3 players. We knew that Jackie Love in particular was really good. Tian has had some up and down moments, but you can rely on him to at the very least be good enough to be able to win with. It's been everybody else that has not necessarily been pulling their weight. I think top lane is a position that has generally been undervalued for top esports. I think that the players that have been playing there, whether it be Tian, whether it be Wayward, have been good enough to be able to win with as well, but I think Wayward has done a much better job than Tian at being a secondary piece on this team, someone who doesn't need resources, somebody who can play weak side. Tian is just not that kind of player, and so bringing Wayward back, I think, has been more of a positive in that particular department. He manhandled Zhao Lao, who in that top lane matchup was definitely the better player. Yes, sometimes he can be a little bit more passive, you know, but that's okay. I think you're going to be okay getting away with that. Mark, I think, is fine as a player. With all the talk about Ming coming to this team, people have underestimated what Mark has been able to do for a very long time. Him and Jackie Love have great chemistry together and have always been a very solid bot lane duo, so glad to see that continue. And then Rookie, who has really been up and down over the course of 2023, is finally starting to find his groove again, and that makes this team incredibly dangerous. When we were talking about them as a top 2, top 3 team in the entire world earlier this year, a lot of that was hinging on the fact that Rookie played like Rookie, you know, played like he has his entire career. Wasn't necessarily doing that at the beginning of the year, but very much feels like he's back on track now. Another really good series from him, and he was by far the better mid laner across the series as well. So just good stuff in general coming out from top esports. And then FunPlus on the other side, they're just not good enough to be able to compete with a team like top. They're just not going to be in the same ballpark. And honestly, a lot of the players that I think you were excited about didn't necessarily perform all that well in this series. First of all, a substitution. Bonnie is in the jungle. This is kind of the moment FPX fans have been waiting for. Hacker has been abysmal for them in that position. And even though Haoya has shown good things, he's certainly not a finished product. And so Bonnie was kind of the one I think a lot of people were waiting to see. And he entered the series here. He certainly wasn't the best debut series of all time, but pretty tough opponent in order to get for your first series. And so gonna cut him a bit of slack. I thought he was fine. Certainly wasn't the biggest problem on FPX. To me, my dud of the series goes to Care in the mid lane, someone who I'm actually very high on as a player, someone who I've seen a lot of upside and potential in. I've compared him a lot to Shanks on WE. I think that they're very similar players in terms of how they like to play the game, and I think they could have very similar career trajectories. But with this FPX team not really playing at a very high level right now, Care is kind of just matching that. And that's the negative, right? Is you need to be able to see him kind of push the team forward and not just kind of fall into mediocrity like the rest of the players on this team kind of have. And in Spring Split, he was doing that. He was creating a lot of space for the team. He was winning some games for this team, but it does feel like the mental has gotten to him a bit. And maybe he's not the player that we think he is, but remember how many times in summer of last year we talked about good players on bad teams that just didn't have their their heart in it anymore because the team wasn't going to win. They weren't going to go anywhere, and they kind of mentally checked out, especially in a season like this where the schedule is so jam-packed. I could definitely see that being the case for Care as well, and I'm not going to completely write him off because of that, but man, he's not had a great start to the split, and this was probably the worst series that he has played in 2023. Zhao Lao, who was also bad, but people who follow the channel know I'm not a big fan of him. This is not a particular surprise to me. I think Wayward is a clear cut above a player like Zhao Lao, and I think that was shown off in this series. LWX and Chocho are just kind of fine in the bot lane. LWX did a good job trying to clean up some kills, and I think Chocho did a good job in game number 1 in particular of trying to make things interesting. I think actually Chocho's probably been the best player on this team across summer split so far, but that's not really saying a whole lot because these two were still pretty heavily outclassed by the opposing bot lane in Jackie Love and Mark, and so FPX really just not a lot of good to talk about. They're a bottom tier team, and they kind of performed like it. And then Top Esports is kind of the opposite. They look like a top team in the league right now, the team that we all kind of were hoping and expected them to be at the beginning of the year. If they can keep that up, they very well could be not only a Worlds team, but a potential LPL Finals team. And now moving on to day number 4 here in week 3 of the LPL. And we kicked off day 4 with another little lopsided matchup between LNG Esports and Rare Atom. That LNG was able to get the job done in 2 games, as they should have. A couple of, I would say, mismatches in the middle of this week here, and that is definitely the case as LNG, one of the best teams in the entire league. Rare Atom, while I do think they are better than people are giving them credit for, certainly not a titan of the league by any means, and LNG kind of showing that. They are still one of the elite teams in the league, despite what their record might tell you. They've only faced tough competition up until this point in the season, and honestly, in some of those series, they were able to come out on top. And so I know that some of these players aren't exactly playing up to their perfect potential at this point, but definitely still showing the signs of what could be one of the best teams in the entire world when the year is said and done. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their player of the series here is going to go to Scout, the spring split MVP here for LNG. Wasn't exactly starting off the split on the hottest of notes, although I do think that was overstated by a considerable margin. He's still been very good for this team, arguably the best player on this team in summer, just not on MVP pace, but this series was absolutely dominant from him. This was MVP Scout back in full form here. The Jace, the Annie, it didn't really matter. Both games were terrific from him. We know how good he was on both of these picks in spring. These were the 2 big champions, I would say, for LPL mid laners in the spring split, and so really curious and really good to see Scout continue to go to these picks and continue to try to generate leads on them. But if he's going to play at this high of a level, it won't really matter that some of the other players on this team aren't exactly playing up to the level that they did in spring. Now, that onus does not fall onto the bot lane. I think Gala and Hang have been fine as a duo. Gala has certainly been very good for this team in the late game, and I think that's really what they brought him on for. They wanted more consistency. He's much better than LP in lane, yes, but I think the consistency from game to game is also significantly higher, and he's also a lot less targetable in terms of pressure in the early game, which is what really got to LNG in that playoff series. We saw teams just throwing resources at the bot lane, and Gala, I think, handles that incredibly well. It allows players like Scout to be able to be a lot more, I guess, efficient in terms of what they're able to do in the early to mid game, and really, for a player like Scout, what he does at a very high level is affect the map. And so if you've got an incredibly strong bot lane, you know, you can get Scout ahead in the 1v1, which is what he does so naturally nowadays, and you can have him start moving down to the bot lane with Tarzan, who he has very good synergy with, and try to get leads there. That was kind of the idea behind LNG, and you can really see that in action in a series like this. The only issue with that plan working out is right now, Tarzan is not in perfect form, and that's really the only kind of hiccup to the problem. I actually think Zika in the top lane has been pretty good. Hang and Gala have been good. Scout has been really good. Tarzan has not necessarily been that player that you're kind of expecting him to be, but we know that he can be that. He's had some trouble in summer in the past, notably last year, where his summer regular season in particular was just not very good. However, he did pick it up for playoffs, and so we know that he has it in him, and obviously him and Scout had fantastic chemistry in spring. It was a big reason why this team was so good. In fact, I would say it was mainly the only reason why this team was so good, and so really I expect him to be able to figure it out, and it's not like this series was a disaster from him. He still was creating plays on champions whose main goal is to initiate, but he was just a little bit over aggressive in terms of what he was able to go for, and honestly gave a few too many resources over to the enemy team. Definitely some things that I think he could clean up, but for now, Scout and Gala are more than enough to be able to push them across the finish line, and Hang and Zika are fantastic secondary pieces for this team as well. And then for Rare Atom on the other side, I like this team. I don't think that they are a disaster. I think that there are good moments. I think Leon Leon has honestly been pretty good to start this split, especially for, I don't want to say his standards as if he's like a bad player, but he can be very up and down. I think he's been more hit than miss across summer so far, which is good, but the consistency from a lot of the other players on this team has just not been there. As much as I like Feather in the support position, and as much as I have honestly been impressed with what he's been able to do, I think Assume is just like not playing well at all right now, and he's going to get my dud of the series here. I'm not going to do like any sort of horn toot, because again, it's only week 3, but if he continues to play at this level for the rest of this split, for the rest of this year, it's on record that I was lower on him as a player. I thought he was just fine as an AD carry, certainly not someone that I was expecting to break out here in 2023, and he really has not. His aggressive tendencies are not paying off. It feels like he doesn't have the mechanics to be able to make them work. I thought he had shown good moments, but certainly wasn't this super big hyper carry for LGD last year, and gets picked up by Rare Adam with a lot of expectation, and I honestly think he's been the worst member of that bot lane so far in Summer Split. Again, very similar to what I talked about with Care. It's just simply too early for me to say that things aren't going well. This is a team that doesn't necessarily have huge playoff aspirations, although I think they should, and they certainly haven't started out the split in a disastrous state in the same way that a team like FPX has, but you could, make the argument that Assume has also kind of mentally checked out to this team. But I would say if that's the case, that's a little bit of a problem, because again, top 10 really is wide open right now, and if Assume was playing well, I think that they would have a better shot, but he's really not in good form. I don't think Feather was particularly great in this series either. I just think he's played better over the course of this split. And also Xiaoshu had one of his worst series in a while. It's going to happen in the top lane. Sometimes you're just going to lose super hard. He had a habit of doing this in Spring Split a little bit more than people gave him credit for, especially at the beginning of the split. He's played well, I would say, in Summer so far, but he's going to have a couple of bad games here or there, especially going into a player like Zika and a team like LNG that really aren't going to give over resources for free. But I think Leon and Strive were actually pretty okay in this series, generating some leads. Strive in particular, I thought, wasn't really making a ton of mistakes and was trying to keep pace with Scout. Scout's just a really good player, and so there are positives to Rare Adam, but make no mistake, they are not in the same contention as a team like LNG, and that's in LNG's favor. They really shouldn't be. LNG is one of the best teams in the entire league, and they have pretty consistently proven that. Obviously, they've got upside to be even better than where I have them right now in my power rankings, and if they continue to put out performances like this more consistently, that's certainly something that's going to be in the cards. And then moving on to our second series of day number 4, and it really is like a top of the table versus bottom of the table clash. Getting quite a few of these this week. We had LGD Gaming taking on Anyone's Legend, and JDG does get the job done, although it is not as clinical as you maybe would have hoped, and certainly not as clinical as the last few series that we've talked about in this video. JDG, kind of known for throwing games here and there, especially against bottom teams. It's something that, honestly, I'm not sure if they just don't prepare for the teams at the bottom of the standings, or if they just feel so confident in their preparation that they kind of just throw it out the window in the first games and just see what ends up working. But a crazy series, I would say, overall from them, that they are going to be able to take. Game 3 especially was very much in their favor, but losing a game to AL is certainly something that you don't particularly want to see from the LPL and MSI champions, but nonetheless, you're still able to see them bounce back. This is the reason best of 3 is just better than best of 1. You actually get results like this. AL would have won this game had it been a best of 1, and so certainly not an ideal situation, but still could have been worse. Overall for JDG, there were a couple of good performances, still a couple of poor performances, and we'll jump into that in just a second. But player of the series for me is going to go to Missing in the support position. He continues to look like the best support in the LPL, and I know there's contention for that. Obviously, Ming's not even playing, and I think he would definitely be in that conversation, but Mako, a great player. I think there are quite a few other players that you could put in that conversation. On has certainly inserted himself into that conversation, but Missing holds that crown for me. He's the most consistent support across this region. A lot of the other players in that role are very high variance, very high risk, high reward, very aggressive players. Missing is that. He can be very aggressive. Is certainly still going to look for a lot of engages, but you don't get the downsides with him that you get with a lot of the other supports at this elo. Still a really, really good player, and a great series coming out from him when he's able to control the game on picks like Renata and like Rakan, whether that be through full engages with their ultimates or just laning phase prowess. He's going to be able to assert that, and in my opinion, he was the most dominant player on JD Gaming. Ruler was also pretty good, didn't really have to do a whole ton in this series, not nearly as influential towards the outcome of the game, but still was pretty good. And then Knight was the other player that I think was definitely making an impact in terms of the pressure that he was able to create, especially on that Ahri in game number 3. Really fun stuff, was able to dominate that laning phase against Harder and his Galio and just kind of move around the map and create a lot of pressure. And that's really what you want to do on a champion like that. And that's what Knight really does at a very high level. Now, it wasn't perfect for JD Gaming. Kanavi sometimes has these games where he just turns his brain off, and that was game number 1, where it was like, are you paying attention? Like, is your monitor on? Are you just like on autopilot? It was very confusing, but Kanavi does this every so often. He's going to have a couple of games here or there where he's just not very good. He bounced back relatively well, I would say, in games 2 and 3, but certainly at least a little bit concerning that the first game wasn't as good as it could have been. He is going into a fellow very good jungler in Xiao Hao. I'm not putting them on the same level, but I'm saying that Xiao Hao is certainly someone that deserves respect, so it's not particularly surprising that he was able to get one game off of him, but Kanavi definitely figured out and got it back on track. But missing going to be my player of the series. Knight definitely in consideration as well, and I think 369 was relatively efficient on the top side as well, even if he was only on tanks. He was definitely a big factor in a lot of the team fights where JDG absolutely excels. They are so good at that point in the game, even if they're struggling at the current moment with the parts that are leading up to that. But for AL on the other side, they're okay. I mean, there's really not a lot to say about this team. They're basically exactly who we thought they were going to be. They're going to have some positive moments. There are good players on this team like Xiao Hao that are going to be able to get this team advantages. He was very good in game 1 on the Nocturne. Harder was very good in game 1 on the Nico, also creating a lot of pressure moving around the map, using that, incredibly strong champion to be able to, I guess, capitalize on a lot of the miscommunication and a little bit of a mental break moments that JDG would have throughout the game. It's really good to pick a champion like Nico that causes so much mental warfare in a situation like that, but the rest of the series, they were just not on the same level, and that kind of came out in the side lanes. I would say ZDZ, not particularly good in the series, definitely worse than 369 in the top lane matchup, just didn't have the same kind of pressure. But my dud of the series is going to go to Zora in the support position. It was most noticeable, I would say, to see the support gap in this series. I think you could give it to ZDZ. Hell, I think you could even give it to Jichoyi, because I don't think he was particularly great in the bot lane either, but Zora, in my opinion, was probably the most noticeable downgrade on AL, and that's okay. Zora going into missing and ruler, like, I'm not expecting him to be able to live up to that kind of expectation, even if I do think he can grow into a relatively decent LPL starter. That's just a little bit out of his pay grade at the current moment, and so to have a bad series, especially on 3 engagers, 2 hook champions and a Rakan in this series, that's a lot of pressure to be put on such a young player, and it's not entirely surprising to not see him be able to live up to that. But Jichoyi was not particularly good. Harder was really bad towards the back half of the series, even if he was good in game number 1, and like I said, ZDZ was very much outplayed by 369 on the top of the map, and so it wasn't really like a one player kind of getting outclassed kind of thing. This was a difficult dud of the series because it really just felt like team diff, especially in the team fights where JDG absolutely excelled. AL is fine as a team. People are going to overreact to them being able to take a win and say, oh, they're much better than 16, but oh, shocker, people are saying that about every team at the bottom of the standings. They're much better than their record. Every team is taking games. It's not really about taking games. It's about finding a semblance of consistency, and that's just not something that AL has proven over the course of the year that they're going to be able to do really at all. This is the team that we think they are, and unfortunately that means near the bottom of the standings. But for JDG on the other side, I mean, they're going to stay number 1 in my power rankings until proven otherwise, but I would really appreciate it if they didn't make these series so close. I would appreciate it if they could just come out and dominate a team like AL. That would certainly make me feel a lot better, but, at least they're able to pick up the W, and at least some of these players are looking good. And then moving on to our third series of day number 4 here, and it was a very anticipated matchup for one reason and one reason alone, and that is a debut. We had ThunderTalk Gaming taking on Bilibili Gaming, and BLG does take the 2-0 win, even though we've got the super hyped up jungler Zhao Huangren making his debut here for ThunderTalk. People have been talking about contract jail. People have been talking about ThunderTalk's mismanagement of this team and of the players and of basically all the talent that they have under contract at the current moment, and whether or you agree or not with how that has been handled, Zhao Huangren making his debut here is certainly an intriguing storyline. A lot of us were really looking forward to seeing whether or not ThunderTalk was going to make a move. I myself had talked about it a lot in previous weeks, saying, stop asking for it. It's not going to happen. Whether it's the right move or not, TT clearly is not going to do it because they're just, they don't want to make that big move. They don't make decisions at ThunderTalk Gaming, but they did it. They actually put him in here in the middle of week 3, and, it's only one series, and it's against BLG, but there was a reason I had limited expectations for something like this, and we'll get into that when we get into ThunderTalk. Of course, we'll get to BLG. First and foremost, this team is just unstoppable. Right now, it really does feel like they're just running through the bottom half of the league, and that's exactly what you want to see. Player of the series for me is going to go to On in the support position. Again, we talked about Jackie Love as an MVP candidate. On is right up there for me as an MVP candidate right now. He's been the best player for Bilibili through the first couple of weeks of the season. He's been so aggressive for them, and obviously we know he can be very aggressive, but in the past, it's always been balanced out by the fact that he's going to have some really bad games here and there, and he's just not had that recently. Basically, every single game that he's played, he's skill gapped the support and the AD carry and the jungler so hard, not only in terms of micro, but in terms of macro, in terms of mechanics, in every way that you could ask him to. He's been about as good as you could ever want him to be. He's become an elite support at this level, and I know people do get relatively tired of hearing me talk about takes that I was correct on, that, you know, I don't like patting myself on the back either, but it is worth bringing up that you go back 2 years, I'm the On fan. Like, I'm the one that is on board, that I'm trying to push people forward on. I'm saying, this dude is Hylissang, and he's better. Like, he's mechanically more intensive than, you know, he can play everything at that level, not just engagers like Hylissang can. And it's no flame to Hylissang. He's gotten a lot better, too. I just think that On is on, like, a different level. Like, he's a world-class kind of talent, especially if he's able to be nurtured. Go back to what I was saying about Weibo last year, saying that this guy is getting an extremely unfair reputation. I was saying similar things about Elk, of course, but, you know, these two coming together have really unlocked each other, both of them being very aggressive players and playing off of each other at a very high level. On has become one of the best players in the world, and it's really been fun to watch. Elk is also fantastic. He was arguably the best player at MSI, and that was super fun to watch, but these two play off of each other in such an incredible way. It's very difficult to play into them, and 1xN and Yao Yao learned that the hard way in this series, but Yagao, Jun have been really good. Bin had easily his best series of the summer split so far, which is really good to see. It's crazy to think that he's only 19 years old. Like, I know that's going to blow some people's minds. Some people are going to be watching this video and being like, that can't be correct. Go look it up. The kid is 19 years old. He was 17 when he made World Finals on Suning. That's where we're at with BLG and the upside that this team potentially has. Everyone is clicking right now. Every single lane is playing at a crazy high level, and this team is just executing everything they need to do. This team is fantastic. They're very fun to watch, and they're playing well. As for ThunderTalk on the other side, again, this was going to be a very prioritized series for a lot of people because of the debut of Xiao Huangren, but the ups and downs, and I'm not going to judge him super hard for the first series because he's going into BLG, he's going into Jun, a team that is absolutely on fire, but he's not somebody who was expected to be able to come in and just kind of change the fortunes of this team. I was saying, and I know people were really pissed off by this in the comment section, I got a lot of comments, especially last split about this. I was saying that Beixuan is maybe a better player right now. Like, he's certainly not a bad player in the jungle. Everybody wants him to be bad. And this is the kind of thing, and I'm not going to get into my LPL Reddit rant because I talk about it a lot here. And I talk about it on Twitter too, but like, the LPL Reddit specifically, or the League of Legends Reddit for the post-match threads for the LPL, they find a player that they choose to dislike, and then they will just dislike him, whether or not it's right or wrong to dislike him. Beixuan is definitely one of that because they like Xiao Huangren. They want to see him, and so they're making up reasons to dislike Beixuan. It's just not the case. He's a good jungler for this level. If you like a player like Leon, you just can't dislike a player like Beixuan. That's how I see it, right? And so Xiao Huangren coming into this team actually does have relatively big shoes to fill, and the Lee Sin game showed a couple of the good things that he can do, but he did lose a lot of pressure after the early game, and the Rek'Sai in general was just not good. The pick is not good. Him playing it was not good. Like, it just wasn't a very good game from him. Again, it's into BLG, so I'm willing to cut him a little bit of slack, and he was far from the worst player on ThunderTalk in this series, but it is worth noting that him being in this lineup is not going to just fix everything. I know a lot of people just, oh, Xiao Huangren and 1xN are contract jailed, and people are playing the bums of Huanfeng and Beixuan above them. They might come in and be significantly worse, and that's really not something that I would be surprised about at all. And the rest of this team is really not picking up the slack. Yu Cao was decent in game number 2, but was miserable in game number 1, kind of the opposite of Xiao Huangren. Hoya's just been really bad all split long, one of the worst top laners in the league, and then Yao Yao has just not looked the same at all since being reinserted into the lineup. He's going to get my dud of the series here. I don't know if it's mental with him because he's been so good over the past, like, year and a half. He was really good in summer of 2022, got benched at the beginning of spring, came back in and immediately revitalized this team into a playoff berth last split as well. And so really wild to see him just not click at all with this bot lane, but he's been pretty bad since he got reinserted into this lineup, and that's honestly just kind of been the case for ThunderTalk overall. I want to blame it more on the organization than I do on the individual players, because we've seen almost all of these players play at a good level before, and there's so much off-the-riff drama when it comes to ThunderTalk right now. I have to imagine that's impacting this team at least a little bit, and so there are definitely things that this team needs to do to grow and get better, but to expect Zhao Huangren and 1xN and these big rookies to come in and immediately change the fate of this team, I think is just naive behavior, if I'm being entirely honest. And then BLG on the other side, they're immense. They're incredible. They're fun to watch. There's only so much I can say about this team in terms of positives. I'm beginning to repeat myself because nothing new is here. It's the best version of BLG we have ever seen, and it's really, really fun to watch. If they can keep this up, JDG is going to have to be scared at that #1 spot. Now we get to move on to day number 5 here in the LPL, and we kicked it off with, you guessed it, a top team versus a bottom team, as we saw Top Esports taking on LGD Gaming, and as expected, Top Esports coming out on top with a 2-0 win. They absolutely should have been the better team in this series, and they were, which is definitely a positive overall for them. Really like, again, what they've been able to do. A lot of this is going to be me parroting what I've said earlier on in this video, what I said last week as well, because really, this team has looked pretty consistent over the course of the beginning part of the split. It's been my player of the series, Jackie Love here, just playing incredibly well. Players like Tian really assisting that in a very high way. Rookie getting back on track, and Wayward and Mark being more than enough to be able to push it forward. It's honestly just a very complete team from top to bottom, and I think that that's the most impressive part, right? Is, yes, Jackie Love is on MVP pace right now, and he's looking like a fantastic carry for this team, maybe the best AD carry in the league at the current moment, which obviously is massive for Top Esports and is really going to be a make or break kind of difference for them. But I'm going to use a little bit of this time to talk, again, big surprise, about the narrative that surrounds Top Esports, the narrative that surrounds a lot of the players on this team. If I have to read on a social media comment section one more time that people are going to throw up if Wayward, Tian, and Mark go to Worlds again, I'm going to punch somebody in the face. Does no one watch the games but me? Like, I sometimes wonder if I'm in this, like, time chamber, and if this is all, like, one big joke on me, where, like, Reddit was specifically created to, like, make me mad and to make me frustrated. Like, I don't know. Am I the only one who feels this way? Because I just don't understand how you can get that watching these games. I understand some of the narratives surrounding the concerns around these players. Wayward has had bad moments in the past. Tian has kind of choked in major scenarios, most specifically Worlds, and Mark's not like a top 3 support in the region, but are we pretending like any of these players aren't like top half of their roles in the LPL? Like, that's absurd. That's not even a conversation to be having. All of these players are incredibly good. Yes, Jackie Love is a fantastic player, and I'm not taking anything away from him. He's probably the best player on this. In fact, he's almost certainly the best player on this team right now, and that's a very good thing for them. But it's this idea that because Jackie Love is good, that means the rest of the team must be getting carried. That's not how this works. That's not how League works at all. You need a team to be able to win games. As good as Jackie Love has been, he wouldn't be nearly as successful if him and Mark didn't have the kind of chemistry and synergy in the bot lane that they have. I know people are really excited about Ming, and I would be too. I think Ming is a great player, but Mark isn't like a schmuck in that role. He's a very good player, a player you can absolutely win the league with. And the same thing can be said about both Wayward and Tian, and all 3 of them receive so many strays on post-match threads and on conversations surrounding Top Esports, even when this team is winning and even when they're playing well, that I just have to address it because I just don't understand it. Rookie has gotten a lot better as well. He's kind of avoided a lot of the negative thoughts and a lot of the negative attention, at least this split. He was definitely a target last split, but he's been a lot more consistent over the course of this split than he was towards the end of last split, which is good. But Tian has been a top 5 jungler in the league so far in summer. Wayward has been a stable presence on the top side. I hear the argument, oh, we can only play tanks on the top side. No, they just don't want Jackie Love to play weak side, which is the right call. And like, it's not Wayward's fault. We've seen him play carries. We saw him do it actually a lot last year, and Jackie Love was put on weak side, and the team, you know, was still winning earlier on in the year and looking relatively good doing it. This team went to Worlds when Wayward was playing relatively well, and so I don't understand this idea that he's incapable of playing those kinds of champions. Again, anybody who's watched the league for more than like a month would know that, right? But that's kind of my biggest problem, is it just feels like these comments are so sure of the idea that these players are bad. And again, going back to the LPL Reddit phenomenon of picking a player to be a scapegoat, picking a group of players to be a scapegoat when things go wrong. That's the kind of treatment that most of this top esports team has garnered over the course of this year, and I just don't think it's relatively fair. Jackie Love's still awesome, but that doesn't mean the rest of this team isn't awesome too. And then for LGD on the other side, it's kind of the opposite. I saw somebody write on Reddit and it had like 50 upvotes that Meteor is the best jungler in the world. What? Like, am I living in a pocket dimension? Am I losing my mind? 50 upvotes for Meteor being the best jungler in the world? Like, yeah, I would agree he's probably a little bit hard stuck on this team, although he played really bad in the back half of game number 2. What a Baron steal. That was so great. If only he didn't give up his entire life for the Lulu immediately after. What was going on? Like, what was the thought process for that? That was a very weird play, but as much as I like Meteor, best jungler in the world is insane. He's not better than Tian. Like, that argument I just don't even think is in the conversation. He needs to show a lot more, I think, to be there. I do think he's a fun player, but again, you want to criticize players like Wayward and Tian and Mark for low champion pools. Meteor definitely has his champion pool as well, and so, you know, things like that are just very weird, but he was decent in this series. Still a couple of brain farts. Decade was certainly better. Still, again, a lot of weird mistakes coming in from the top side of the map for LGD, but I think the biggest difference was going to be the bot lane here for them. The bot just got gapped quite a bit. Jin Zhao's going to get my dud of the series. He's been pretty abysmal to start this split for them. A major black hole in terms of pressure for LGD, and Envy has certainly not been the player that I think they were hoping that they were going to get coming in from the LCK. At the beginning of this split, we talked about how I was much lower on Envy than a lot of people. He had basically never shown anything until he got to play with Kayle, who's one of the best supports in the world. And so I'm not particularly surprised to see him leave that environment and not play up to that same kind of standard, but you know, this bot lane has been very bad. I think this mid lane has been surprisingly bad. I like Hai Chao. I know people have high expectations for him. I was never quite on that train, but he's certainly not been able to beat anybody in lane 1v1. And the top side of this map isn't great either. Decade really hasn't been able to do anything. Fairness is just kind of nothing. Meteor really has been the saving grace of LGD, but even then, like, he's going to throw away some games with bad positioning because he's very aggressive as a player. And so, you know, there's ups and downs, but LGD to me, clearly the worst team in the league at the current moment. And then top esports, clearly a very good team, one of the best teams in the entire world, honestly. We just saw what the LPL is capable of doing on the international stage, and Top Esports is kind of running through the LPL. They haven't exactly been challenged at the highest level yet, but if they keep up this form, they're going to be able to go toe-to-toe with basically anybody in the league. And then moving on to our second series of day number 5, another pretty intriguing matchup of interesting orgs that aren't necessarily performing at the highest level right now. We have FunPlus Phoenix taking on Royal Never Give Up. And RNG is going to be able to take the series 2-0. Nice win for them. This is obviously one they should walk away feeling good about. Not that FPX is the biggest and toughest competition in the world, but when you get a clean 2-0 win when you're a team like how RNG has performed up until this point, that's got to feel relatively good. They're able to take care of business against the teams that they absolutely should be able to do that against. And they're still going to struggle a bit against some of the top teams in the league. They very much feel like the LPL gatekeeper right now. They're going to beat the non-playoff teams. They're going to lose to the actual playoff teams, and they're probably going to be a first or a second round exit. Obviously, there's a couple of players on this team that maybe give you bigger upside than that, but they just haven't necessarily shown that up until this point. But certainly a player like Wei is going to kind of increase the floor of that kind of problem. He's going to be my player of the series. The dude has been an absolute menace for RNG across this split so far, I should say. I shouldn't say this year. I was going to say this year, but he had some very bad moments in spring that looked very questionable. In fact, he was one of their worst performing members in spring, and so really good to see him kind of put his carry pants on now that he definitely is the best player on this roster with all of the changes that have ended up coming through. Wei really looking great this week. Even in their loss earlier this week, he looked pretty good, but in this win, he was dominant. Whether it be the Wukong, whether it be the Kazakhs, both games were completely controlled in the jungle by RNG, and that was a big reason why they were able to come out on top. The early game aggression that he was able to show, getting that snowball rolling, and then being able to punish a lot of mid-game mistakes to be able to translate these into relatively quick games, I would say, and certainly dominant ones on the side of RNG. It's just impressive stuff. This looked like peak Wei, and that's exactly what you're going to need to see if you're an RNG fan, if you want this team to be relatively competitive. Again, they're really not all that great outside of him in terms of the talent, and so Wei's going to need to step up and be that big super carry in order for them to be better than this number 9 ranking. But, you know, when Wei does well, the rest of this team is going to look good. Breathe got to play some weak side top laners. That's what he can do at a really high level. We know he can carry as well, but when the enemy team is picking Sion, when they're picking Jax, he's going to be fine playing the Ornn, playing the Poppy, things like that, pulling out these more supportive picks to let the rest of the team kind of take advantage of their strengths, which is what LP and Lumao really want to do. LP has been fine as the starting AD carry. He's had a couple of games where he's been really good and a couple of games where he's been meh, right? And that's kind of what we expected from LP. That's pretty much exactly what he was on LNG last split. He's basically the same player. He gets to play with Lumao, who I think is a decent support, a little bit over-aggressive and definitely more of an engaged support main kind of player, but they were definitely helped and bolstered by the fact that Wei had a really good series here. Wei being able to create all that pressure and then move it down into the bot lane definitely made LP on that Aphelios look a lot more proficient. And then ThunderTalk, I think, was fine. As long as he doesn't cause problems for this team, I think they can win. If this mid-jungle duo can develop some synergy and some chemistry, I think that would be great as well. ThunderTalk taking a backseat in the series hopefully is the sign of things to come, because if he's going to be a little bit less of a focal point in terms of resources and kind of giving over some of those resources to Wei in the jungle, I think that's going to be the best way for RNG to be able to take out some of the other teams in the league. And so liked what I saw from them. Pretty good series from RNG, I would say, overall. And then for FPX on the other side, another substitution. Bonnie's back out. Hacker's back in. Why? Bonnie looked fine in their earlier series. Certainly, they weren't a great team, but it wasn't really his fault. Hacker comes back in and immediately gets jungle gapped again. Like, what are we doing? Why is he playing? I don't understand. Can someone explain this to me? Like, this is a very weird decision by FPX. Maybe it's a matchup thing that they saw. Maybe Hacker has some inside info on Wei and the way he pats, but Wei absolutely demolished him in this series, and it wasn't particularly close. Hacker pulling out the Nocturne in game number 1. He's just not the kind of player that's going to be able to pull that off, and he wasn't very good on the Wukong either, and so definitely a disappointing series, but not my dud of the series. My dud of the series is going to go to Zhao Laohu on the top side. This top side of the map is just a complete and utter black hole for FPX. Neither of these players have been LPL caliber over the course of this year at all, and it's been a massive problem. Zhao Laohu was literally nothing in this series. On the Scion, he was a frontline tank that couldn't survive any damage. In game 2 on the Jax, he was just dying instantly. It didn't really matter that he wasn't getting any damage off because he was never in a position to deal damage in the first place. Zhao Laohu is just not an LPL top laner. I've been saying it for years. That's actually a take that I think I've been pretty accurate on. This team has continuously and consistently given him chance after chance after chance, and I just don't think he's the kind of player that they want him to be. He's got some mechanics, but man, he has just never looked good at the LPL level, and that continues into this year. Hacker, again, really bad. I want to see Bonnie. There's really no reason not to see Bonnie at this point. He's already shown that he's willing to step in and play, even if there is a communication error, and so I just want to see him on the Rift because I think that'll make them at least a little bit more coherent. And then Care, LWX, Chocho, they're fine as players, but certainly not good enough to be able to carry what this top side of the map was doing in this series. And so FPX is a bad team. Big shocker. And then RNG is a pretty decent team. Being able to take down number 15, not the biggest shock in the world in terms of power rankings or upsets or anything like that, but Wei having the kind of series that he did is definitely enlightening. It's good to see the fact that Tongyuan and LP as a very young carry duo can perform well if the rest of this team is, you know, kind of being funneled, I guess you could say. If they're willing to take a backseat and be more of those secondary carries, they kind of fit well into that role. There is an avenue and a pathway for this RNG team to be better than what they are right now. It's just going to take wins over teams that aren't FPX to convince me that they have that kind of potential. And then moving on to our third series of day number 5 here. And finally, we have a matchup between two teams that are at least kind of close in terms of skill level. We saw Ultra Prime taking on Ninjas in Pyjamas. And NIP continues to look relatively good against the teams that they should beat, and this is a really encouraging sign from this team. This is a team that was not doing this last split. They weren't only losing to the good teams, they were losing to everyone. We had them as a playoff team at the start of the split, if a controversial one that I was much lower on, and obviously that came to pass, but they really did not even live up to even remotely that expectation. They were not even close to being a playoff team for most of spring, and so to see them in such a good position right now, you know, towards the back half of week number 3 here, I think it's just a really encouraging sign for NIP in general. And I think a lot of it is due to their new additions in the jungle and in the mid lane, who have really come in and honestly been this team's best players over the course of the summer split so far. My player of the series is going to go to Angel in the mid lane. Oh my god, what a career resurgence Angel is having on NIP through the first couple of weeks. I mean, he's legitimately been one of the best mid laners in the LPL. He has been so consistently winning in lane. He has so consistently been dragging this team to wins. I know they've played a lot of games early on. They've had one of the most jam-packed schedules, but still, Angel's done a really good job in that schedule, and this is not the same kind of player that we were seeing last split on RNG, hell, even last year on Weibo Gaming. This is not the Angel that I think we've all grown accustomed to. He is definitely a little bit of a different player here on NIP. He's taken more of a resource-heavy role, someone who wants to carry games, and That's awesome. That's exactly really what we wanted to see out of him, and this team really needed a player like that. So to see him do it at such a high level has been fantastic. Really, really like what we're seeing out of Angel. Legitimately one of the more surprising and more fun players to watch so far in the LPL. And Shadow has been in a very similar boat. He's actually been very good for this NIP team. A little bit inconsistent in spring when he got put in about midway through the split, but a little bit more time to gel with the rest of the players on this team. And I think him and Angel in the mid lane have formed a ridiculously good mid-jungle duo. They have like a crazy amount of chemistry for how little they have played together. It's something that I think might only get better as the split goes on, and it gives me a lot of hope that this team is going to be a better team in that kind of respect. If Shadow and Angel are going to be your two best performing members, that really does open up a lot of doors to be able to play in other avenues. Invincible was really good on the top side. He was just way better than Harry in this series. And Photic and Juo were also really good on the bot side. They were better than Doggo and Sword Art, and that's a very encouraging thing to see. I was talking a bit about this earlier in the week, but bot lane has been a little bit of the weak link for this team, and Photic has certainly made some mistakes that have cost this team some resources. It's good to see him kind of step up in this series in particular against what is the strongest part of Ultra Prime's map. And so, in general, really like what we see out of NIP right now, and I don't think I made a mistake moving him in to my top 10 after last week. And then Ultra Prime on the other side, they are what they are, right? We kind of know what they are. A lot of people are going to be looking at Ning in this series, and that's really what Ultra Prime is going to be centered around. As good as Doggo and Sword Art have been, and they've honestly been pretty okay for Ultra Prime. I wouldn't say great, but good enough for Ultra Prime. Definitely the strongest part of that map. Ning is definitely the one that's going to get a lot of attention. When they win, he looks good because he's going to play this super aggressive style, and if he's able to generate those early advantages, he's going to be able to spiral them out of control. But when he loses just as hard as any other jungler in the entire world, and that's kind of the case. I do want to commend him for a lot of the plays he at least tried to make in this series, so he's not going to get my dud of the series, even though I think a lot of people are going to give it to him. I'm going to give it to Forge in the mid lane, who just got outplayed. It really was not close. The 1v1 in the mid lane was so skewed towards NIP that I really don't see how Ultra Prime was ever expected to have any sort of pressure on the map. Forge has actually been okay over the course of this split, and I certainly think he's been better than Ching once they inserted him into the starting lineup for Ultra Prime, but this was one of his worst series, I would say, in that Ultra Prime uniform. Just really, really bad from him. Harry was also really, really bad on the top side. Very inconsistent player. We've been seeing probably the highest highs that he's had in his LPL career so far at the start of summer, but this is kind of more of what we saw in spring. Just a very lackluster performance. This is maybe even a little bit worse than what we were seeing in spring. So solo laners definitely not keeping up, not living up to expectations, and that's always going to be a little bit of an unfortunate side effect. I think Doggo and Sword Art are fine as a bot lane. Sword Art in particular is definitely better than I expected, and I think Doggo gets a bad rep. He may not be like a top 10 AD carry, but that's pretty hard to break into in the LPL. I still think he is a solid AD carry and an LPL caliber AD carry for sure, and I just don't think he's got a lot of LPL talent around him on this team, unfortunately. But for NIP on the other side, they look good. They look like a low-tier playoff team. Now, there still is a lot of things that this team needs to do. They are just above 500, and those wins aren't exactly against the strongest teams in the league, but if they can beat all of the teams that are in, like, the bottom 7, like, that's going to get you a playoff spot, probably. 7 wins is probably going to get you a playoff spot this split with how the rest of this league is currently panning out. And so, for NIP, all they really have to do is just survive. Keep on beating the teams that you're supposed to beat. If Shadow and Angel can continue to grow as a duo, this team's upside could even be higher than number 10. And then moving on to day number 6 now, and we're really getting into the thick of things. These videos are crazy long for the LPL, so I appreciate you guys sticking it with me. But to kick off day number 6, we had an interesting matchup between Invictus Gaming and OMG that OMG is going to be able to take in 2 games. This is the side of OMG I wanted to see. An absolute throttling coming in from the better team in this series. And really, I couldn't ask for anything more. I've been waiting to see this version of OMG basically all split long up until this point. I did expect a little bit of regression coming into the split, but they just didn't have the same kind of fire that they played with in spring for me in summer so far. But this series was definitely one where they brought back the heat because they were a lot of fun to watch here. Every single lane absolutely dominated and won very, very hard. And honestly, you could praise all 5 players on the side of OMG, and I'm going to because they all played at a very high level. But for me, my player of the series is going to go to Aki in the jungle. This is what I was waiting for. I was waiting for Aki to re-emerge. I was waiting for him to get back into that form he was remotely in spring, where he was legitimately one of the best junglers in the world in terms of his actual performances on the Rift. Hasn't necessarily been that at the start of summer for this team yet, but we know the talent is in him, and we know if he can get back to that point, that this team is going to be crazy successful like they were in that last split, like they were a top 4 team in that last split. And so to see that in Aki here, most specifically just the psychological warfare that he imparted onto Beishang. I'm not sure if in that second game Beishang got a single one of his jungle monsters, or in that first game, either really, if I'm being entirely honest. Just the consistent amount of invades coming out from the side of OMG was merciless, was relentless, and it really, really made it very difficult for IG to play the game. Beishang had basically no options in the early game, and Aki does a better job than most other junglers at being able to kind of push that advantage, put himself into a good position, and get his laners ahead in particular, and so really good stuff from him. The other player that you really got to shout out here, Cream, and we were kind of waiting for him to make that big breakout appearance here. He can be a little bit feast or famine. You know, players of his, I would guess, archetype, I guess you could say, are definitely a little bit more feast or famine, that more melee, assassin, mid-oriented player. When you get those more assassin-oriented picks and they start to work, you're going to look really good as a player, and when you don't get them and they don't work as well, then maybe you're not going to look as good. But Cream, able to be really good on the Akali in Game 1, and arguably even better on the Nico in Game 2, something that he's fallen victim to quite a bit over the course of this split already so far. So it's good to see the jungle mid duo really stepping up for OMG, but Shanji continues to be an absolute menace, one of the most fun players in the entire league, and the best player on OMG, at least across this entire year so far, and really, really like him as a player. Pulling out the Darius as the counter to Cassante, it's not the first time that we've seen something like that, but Shanji just plays it better than almost anybody else in the world. He is an elite level top laner at this point. There really is no denying it. He's not just an up-and-coming great top laner. He has officially hit the stage of being a great top laner. He beats everybody that he comes into contact with. And then Abel and PP God were really solid as well. Abel 2 games at Tristana clearly wasn't something they were just wanting to pull out as a counter pick earlier in the week. Now they're playing it into Zeri. Now they're playing it into Zaya. It doesn't really matter that it's not Aphelios. They're going to be pulling it out anyways. Abel's champion pool has always been a little bit funny. Obviously, people think of the Samira, but Aphelios has also been a really big pick for OMG over the years. It feels like Abel definitely gets on board with a champion and then continues to play them at the pro level until they get banned out for him over and over and over again. And it's a strategy that continuously makes him a pretty dangerous player to have to play into. PP God was also terrific in this series, as you can probably tell from the scoreline, but everybody on OMG really putting in a lot of work. As for Invictus on the other side, you know, they're still missing their top laner. They're still missing You Should Know Me. And for as fun of a player as Wen is, he's not very good, and that's going to be a little bit of a problem. He's going to get my dud of the series here. That Jax game in game number 1 was absolutely miserable. Like, he was unplayable in that first game on Jax. I think he went 0-6, 0-6-0 or something like that. Just not very good. The whole game number 1 was absolutely miserable. Didn't get a single kill on the side of Invictus, but Wen was particularly bad in that top lane matchup going into Shanji and having to play into Aki's Vi in particular. And then Beishang continues to really struggle in that jungle position again. Tianjin was really bad in that role, and he was somebody who absolutely needed to, I don't want to say needed to be replaced, but certainly wasn't going to be a good player for a team that was trying to make the playoffs. But Beishang has clearly got some rust on him, and I'm not going to completely write him off as a player, but his first 2 performances have both been pretty awful, and that's not a very good sign. For as good as he has shown in the past, it is not really working out at the moment. Cryan had a bad series, which means this team can't really win. Wink, like I said, is just not playing well in summer so far, and you know, there's really only so much you can do when you're on as an AD carry in a game where basically everybody else on the map is getting absolutely destroyed. And so there are a lot of problems with Invictus right now. They do not look like a top 12 team. In fact, they look like a bottom 3 team in terms of how they've been playing recently, but fortunately for them, I guess you could say, a lot of teams in the LPL have looked like a bottom 3 team in the recent weeks, and so it's going to be interesting to see where they end up falling in the end of week power rankings. But OMG looking good. Still need to see them do it consistently against teams that are a little bit better than Invictus, but to see all 5 members performing at a high level, especially Aki and Cream, who I think are really the keys to unlocking this kingdom for OMG, is a really good sign. Then moving on to our second series of day number 6 here, and we're really looking out to see if a team was going to be a little bit more consistent than maybe they had been in the past. We had a matchup between Rare Adam and Weibo Gaming that Weibo was again able to take. That's 2 games against 2 lower teams in the standings, and both times Weibo came out on top in week number 3. Now that is what we wanted to see. Now, before we get all excited and giddy, wasn't a very clean series from Weibo. The main issues that we have with this team are very much still present, but there are still a lot of positives and a lot of great takeaways to be able to talk about when it comes to this team that I think are definitely exciting for the future of what they might be able to do. And then, of course, Rare Rare Atom on the other side, they are who they are. I'm not particularly surprised that they were good or bad in this series. They kind of lived up to expectation. We'll talk about some of the lineup decisions that they might be trying to make here and why I think the choice is very clear by this point. But let's, of course, start with our winners, and let's start with Weibo. Of course, Born to Win trade. They tried their best to lose this game. I shouldn't say they, because Xiaohu and Light were phenomenal. Xiaohu and Light did not try their best to lose this game. They tried their very best to win this game, and Light did a fantastic job of doing so. He's going to get my player of the series here in the bot lane. Has gotten quite a few of these for Weibo to start the split, and that's because typically when this team is going to be more consistent, when you're looking at a full best-of-3 series like this, Light is the one that they rely on in a lot of the late-game team fights to be able to win. Xiaohu is obviously very good in that stage of the game, but when he's on the Gragas, when he's on the Ahri, he's not typically going to have as big of an impact as, you know, an Aphelios or a Zeri or something like that in that part of the game. And so Light being able to step up and be that primary carry for this team is another reason why they're just better, I think, than a lot of people give them credit for. Light has always been a very good carry. Go look at 2022. I know I was really annoying about it, but I was so high on Light when he was on LNG last year, and it really felt like Tarzan and Doenby were running it every single game, and they needed that bot lane to step up every single game for them to be able to win, especially in the regular season, and Light was more than capable of doing that for that team, and it feels like he does something very similar for Weibo, being that stability, being that rock for this team, to just be someone that they can rely on in the mid to late game to carry them across the finish line when the rest of the team isn't exactly living up to expectation. Xiaohu as well was a phenomenal team fighter this series. Those two were really kind of against the world, if you will. I don't want to say that Weiwei and Crisp were bad, because they had really good moments. Weiwei, not necessarily a ton of standout great moments from him, but certainly not bad ones. And Crisp, kind of the opposite. A lot of standout great moments from him in game 1, but a lot of bad moments in the other games as well. And so a little bit more inconsistent, but I think Xiaohu was another one of those players that just had a really good series here, was really good into both Mole and Strive, really didn't matter what the circumstance was, and so really happy to see the two carry roles step up for Weibo. They're both great team fighters. That's kind of what both of them are known for, and so really glad to see that come to fruition here. But we gotta talk about the Shy, because as much as I was praising him for going deathless, this is exactly what the Shy does. He went deathless earlier on in the week, and then in the second series against Rare Atom, he tries his absolute best to single-handedly lose the series for his team. I mean, this is just what he does. A miserable series coming out from the Shy. His scoreline doesn't really look all that bad, but man, when you watch these games, it's just not very good. This is the player that he is. He's going to have one good series and one bad series, and the bad series is certainly going to stick out more, and so I don't really know what the ceiling is for Weibo because of that, because against the best teams in the league, you can't have a performance like this and expect to not be hard punished for it. As much as I like Xiaoshu as a player, he's really not at the level yet where he can perma-punish a player like the Shy in lane for making a lot of these mistakes that he does end up making, but really, I mean, the Shy is a weakness for this team. He is a bottom half top laner at this point in his career, and I don't even think it's really all that up for debate anymore. It's not just been 1 year. It's not just been one split. This has been the progression of his career over the past few years, and this is kind of the culmination of that. A very bad series from him. Luckily, Xiaohu and Light were there to step up. Crisp was very good in game 1. Weiwei was just pretty consistently all right throughout the entire series, and so Weibo was able to get over the hump because Rare Atom's not the kind of team that's going to be able to punish and deal with that, but against better teams, I am still a little bit worried. As for Rare Atom on the other side, though, just a little bit of an up and down series. A couple of good moments. First of all, they started Mole again in game number 1, but he got blasted by Xiaohu in lane. In fact, so much so that he's going to get my dud of the series. That single game from him in game number 1 was easily the worst game anyone played in this series. Maybe Leon's game number 1 was a little bit worse, but man, Mole was miserable in that game. So much so that he ends up getting subbed out for Strive, who comes in, plays the same champion in the same matchup in game 2, and absolutely dominates it. This should completely clear up the discussion as to who should be starting in the mid lane. Strive is the better player by a consistent margin, and Mole was just not able to hang here, and so mid lane, all right for Rare Atom. Not great in game 1, but it was okay through the rest of the series. Leon had a really good game 2 on the Poppy and was relatively efficient on the Viego in game 3, which is why he doesn't get done of the series for what was another miserable Sejuani game in game number 1. Xiaoshu could have done a lot more to punish the mistakes that the Shy was making in the top lane, but still did a relatively good job of that. And then Assume and Feather are just all right in the bot lane. Like, Assume is not someone who's going to be stepping up and actually playing well against a player as good as Light, and Feather is also not experienced enough to be able to create those advantages on his own either, and so it ends up just hitting a point where it feels like both of these teams are, or I should say Rare Atom in particular, are just kind of sitting there waiting for Weibo to make a mistake, trying to capitalize on it, but ultimately just not having enough talent and not having enough firepower to be able to team fight and keep up with them in the late game. And so Rare Atom definitely has some positives, but again, a lot of negatives for this team as well. And then for Weibo, so inconsistent. If they can play like this, They're going to win some games, they're going to lose some games. This is the team that we expect from Weibo. This is the kind of team that can beat Rare Atom, but doesn't really have a chance of especially winning a best of 5 against any of the top teams in the region. And I know this team has Worlds aspirations. They don't just want to be a good team. They want to be a very good team. And yes, they're sitting at 4-2, and yes, they're picking up victories, but I need this team to look a lot more consistent, and I certainly need this top side of the map to be something that I can rely on, at least to survive, before I really ever consider this a Worlds team. And then we get into the final series of day number 6, and we finally get a little bit of a top-of-the-table clash. Not a lot of these in week number 3, but we had a matchup between LNG Esports and Edward Gaming that LNG takes very handily in a 2-0 series win. This is what I wanted to see out of LNG. This is the side of this team that we had been waiting for. EDG, you know, they're a good team. I know that there's a lot of craziness that's going on right now. New bot lane, a couple of these players not necessarily playing up to what they did in the previous split, but LNG looked so good in this series. Everything, and I mean everything, worked for this team. Every lane won super consistently. They had a great game plan. EDG really had no consistent answers to what they wanted to do on the map, and so they were just kind of able to run things, and that's so impressive and so good for the outlook of what this team is going to be able to hopefully do over the rest of this split. So let's go ahead and talk about it. My player of the series is going to go to Hang in the support position. Really fun series from him, but that Blitzcrank game in game number 2, the disruption that he was able to cause, a lot of people are going to look at that hook onto Fofo towards the back half of the game to disrupt that R2, but he was really good throughout that entire game. I mean, he was hitting hooks consistently onto Uzi, onto that Aphelios, especially in the early laning phase, really making his life a lot more difficult, and really setting Gala up to be a pretty consistent carry on this Xayah in both games, even on the Milio. So really good stuff from him. Really glad to see him stepping up. This team was kind of billed as a 3-man beast at the beginning of the year before they were getting Gala. Obviously, now their build is a 3-man beast, but it's Tarzan, Scout, and Gala. It used to be Tarzan, Scout, and Hang. That's kind of how he looked at this team at the beginning of the year in terms of consistency, and so really good to see the support stepping up and continuing to play well. Gala was awesome. Scoreline maybe a little bit inflated for how good his support played, but still was really good and is great at capitalizing off of the things that his teammates do at a very high level. Also very fun to see Gala versus Uzi. What a fantastic matchup that we get to see. Obviously, legendary RNG support, or AD carries, I should say, but the other main carry for this team was Scout in the mid lane, who just continues to be fantastic. I know people were a little concerned with his performances in the first couple of weeks. I certainly was not. He can have a couple of bad games here and there. He's allowed to do that, but going up against his former org, he definitely had something to prove in this one. Pulled out his opponent's signature champion in the Jace in game number 2 and absolutely decimated him on it. Really good stuff from Scout. He's back in MVP form. He looked phenomenal throughout the entirety of week number 3. Tarzan looked good in this series. Zika looked good in this series. LNG honestly just looked fantastic, and it's about everything you could have asked for. And then for EDG on the other side, couple of problems, but all right, it's time to ring the bell. Is that the overreaction Andy alert? Yes, it is the overreaction Andy alert, because Reddit has gone on a tirade now that Fofo is not an LPL mid laner. What do you guys think? What do you guys think I'm going to say when I gave him second team all-pro last split? Do you think I'm going to say that Fofo is not an LPL caliber mid laner? Let's all take this into perspective for a bit. He had a bad couple of games. He wasn't very good on the Cassante in game 1, and honestly, he was really bad on the Nico in game 2. He is going to get my dud of the series. I'm not trying to deny that he hasn't played, you know, I guess great in this series in particular, but are we just like forgetting? Like, that's what I have to imagine, is that LPL fans in particular, I know this happens in a lot of different communities, but man, it happens the most in the LPL. LPL fans in particular are goldfish. Those are the people who watch these games. They are, oh, I just watched this and Fofo was bad. He is a bottom 3 mid laner in the region. And then next week when he plays well, Fofo's a top 3 mid laner in the region. They just don't have the memory span and the attention span to be able to remember anything that has happened before like 5 days ago. And so right now, Fofo is the target of Reddit rage, and obviously that's absurd. Anybody who has watched any EDG over the course of this year knows that that is absurd. He was so good for this team in spring. He's certainly not washed. He just had a bad series against one of the best mid laners in the world in Scout. It's allowed to happen. He didn't play the Nico very well, but I expect him to be able to bounce back relatively efficiently. Rest of the team was also not very good. Uzi and Mako got camped into oblivion, especially in that game number 2, and they were not able to hold up. Obviously, you can blame the rest of the map for not helping them out at all, but they were continuously in positions where they were, you know, out of position and able to be ganked, and it's like, at some point, like, you gotta, you know, play a little bit safer, and just didn't feel like that was ever on the cards for EDG. And then Ale and Jeje were also not not particularly great on the top side of the map. This really was a little bit of a slaughter. Nobody really playing all that well. Jeje definitely had some moments on the Viego where he was getting some resets, but you could also criticize his macro decisions a lot in this series. So pluses and minuses, I would say, for both teams, but EDG is starting to scare me. This team was supposed to start to turn it around once Uzi got here, and it really has not been the case. It was a good win earlier this week against a pretty weak IG team, but they finally faced some real competition, and they didn't just not hold up. They absolutely crumbled, and so big concerns about EDG, especially moving into the future, but LNG, they're looking really, really good. This is a top 3 team for a reason. Top 2 feels really solidified right now, but LNG feels right on the outskirts of that. Even with some early losses, I trust this team a lot, and it feels like they're only getting better, which is a big positive for them moving forward. I think this team by the end of the year could be one of the scariest in the entire world, and we kind of got a glimpse of that in this one. And then finally, moving on to day number 7 here, the final day of LPL action. The 19 series are definitely quite a lot to go through in this video, but we're wrapping it up here. And our final day was kicked off with a matchup between ThunderTalk Gaming and Ninjas in Pyjamas that NIP is able to take. I think this is a pretty secure place to put them now in the playoff picture. At 5-3, they're looking really good. A ton of games to start their split. Already played 8 series in the LPL. That is an actual crazy amount. In terms of their schedule, it's halfway over. They've already played half their split, and it's week number 3, and so that's pretty insane, but congratulations to this team for sitting in a pretty good spot, and honestly, these players continue to look really good together, and what I'm most impressed by, I would say, is the development of this bot lane. It feels like early on in the split, jungle mid were definitely carrying a lot of what this team was doing, and we'll get to that. They're still very, very good and very proactive for this team, but Photic and Juo have slowly but surely started to get back on track with where they were in spring, where they were a good portion for this team. Definitely something that they could play through, even if I am a little bit lower on Photic than popular opinion. Certainly not a top 5 bot laner in the LPL. Maybe top 10? You know, it's probably somewhere around that area is where I would put him, but this jungle mid continues to be great. My player of the series is going to go to Shadow in the jungle. He's just been sensational for this team, basically the entire split. What an addition for them. I'm not sure I would have made the call to end up replacing Xiaolan Bao in the jungle. I feel like I would have let him stick it out a little bit more because of the pedigree that he had shown in the past, and obviously this team wanted to invest a lot of resources into him with what they did last year as Victory 5, but replacing him with Shadow might be one of the bigger and better decisions that they've made basically all year long. It was a very big one, and both of those Poppy games in particular were just absolutely fantastic, but he's been a great setup jungler the entire split. Angels looked great as the carry in the mid lane, but somebody has to get him to the point where he can be a lot better in that role, and Shadow really was the one doing that, and so he's going to get player of the series here. He's just been really, really good. I know LEC fans are going to be excited about that for Mad Lions now to Ninjas in Pyjamas, kind of a subsidiary LEC team, if you will, and so really good to see Shadow continue to play at a high level, but Photic and Juo were a ton better in this series, in my opinion. Definitely a lot better than they had been in recent weeks, and so to see Photic step up and be able to perform well when the rest of the team is doing well, that's exactly what you want to see. You don't need him to be a world beater. He can be a world beater. He's got the mechanics to be a world beater, but he doesn't really have the consistency to do that. You don't really need him to be that, which is good. You just need him to be able to survive against some bot lanes that aren't very strong, like 1xN and Yao Yao or Yuyanja or whoever's playing, right? And neither of those bot lanes have been very good. 1xN's been fine, I guess, at the LPL level, but Photic and Juo are definitely better than that, and I think they proved that in this series, which is all you really need them to do. Again, just survive. Just make it so that when you're put in a position where the rest of the team can carry, they can, and Photic can step up when he needs to, especially in late game team fights like he did in game number 3. And Juo, I think, had a really underratedly good spring. Has not been great to start summer, but, you know, put him on Milio and he's going to look pretty good doing that. And so, overall, just a lot of positives for NIP. It's really good that I didn't bring up Angel in the first couple of conversations because he's really been the carry for this team. So, to see them win a series without him really popping off in the mid lane is great, but man, he has been really great for this team. I could have never imagined he'd be as good as he has been so far. And then Invincible's fine on the top side. Wasn't a great series from him, but more than fine enough to be able to win with. And so, good for NIP. They definitely look like a playoff team right now. As for ThunderTalk, basically the exact opposite. This team's now sitting at 1-6, and they made the playoffs last split, and I wanted to believe in them, but God, I just have to give up now. Like, I understand they want to go for this youth movement. I understand that they're trying to find a combination that works, but they've run this team into the ground. Clearly nothing is working right now, and you can, talk about the reasons why, but players that were good before are now bad. Like, I can't even really explain it. Yao Yao's a great example. He's been good every single time that he's played in the LPL for this ThunderTalk team, whether it be last year, whether it be last split. He's been very good for this team. He's made them better, and he's been reinserted into this lineup and has looked like an absolute scrub, an absolute chump in the support position. He's going to get my dud of the series again here in the bot lane. The Braum, the Nautilus, it's not working for this team. I don't know if Yao Yao's mental is just completely destroyed from all the off-drift stuff, and I'm going to be honest, mine would be. His team literally told him that he's not good enough to be able to play in the LPL. Yeah, that's going to destroy my confidence at least a little bit, and so I would understand if that's the case, but subbing him out for Yanja is clearly not the answer, because Yanja is not very good either, and so you're just stuck in this situation where you don't have a good performing support, and that's a really important role in the meta right now with how strong Milio and Yumi and a lot of these other picks are, and so very unfortunate that support is such a black hole for ThunderTalk right now, but 1xN is just fine. I know people are really excited about his potential, but again, I don't really see it yet. Same thing with Zhao Huangren. Again, I'm going to get so much flack for this, but, like, he's playing worse than Beishuan did right now. Like, the first couple of series that we saw him, yes, ThunderTalk is a disaster, but Beishuan wasn't playing all that bad. He had a couple of bad games here and there, but certainly not a ton of bad series, I would say, overall, and Zhao Huangren really has not been a difference maker for this team in the slightest, and so what was all this fuss about? This entire fiasco, this entire headache that has been going on at ThunderTalk was caused by fans uprising for Zhao Huangren not playing. He's just a guy right now, and I hope he becomes more than that because people really do have a lot of good expectations for him, but you can't watch this series and say that he didn't get hard out jungled by Shadow. And it's not, as good as Shadow has been, it's not like he's like this upper tier unbeatable jungler, and so where is this? Where was the hero that we were promised? Because it just doesn't seem to be there right now, even if he's not making a ridiculous amount of mistakes. He's certainly not making this team better at the current moment. And then Hoya was actually pretty good in the top lane. I thought he was the best performing member, especially in that game 3 on the Cassante. He was relatively fed. Unfortunately, just not enough on the team to be able to do something with it. And so they ended up losing the game. ThunderTalk is just a disappointing team to talk about right now. They're not fun to watch. They're not fun to talk about. Nothing is going right for this org, and then basically the opposite's happening for NIP. They are so much more fun to talk about than they were in spring. So much more is going right for this team, and that's really good. I think Angel and Shadow together have unlocked a lot. Photic and Juo seem to be getting back onto the same page, and then Invincible, I think, is solid on the top side, can win in 1v1s, and so NIP, a dangerous team, and very likely, at least with all the other teams, kind of disappointing right now in that top 10. That's going to bring us to our second series of day number 7 here, and it's a matchup between two teams that attended Worlds last year from the LPL. We saw Royal Never Give Up taking on Top Esports, and TES does pick up the 2-1 series win to move themselves to 7-1 to start the split. About as good as you could ask for. Obviously, their schedule is going to get a little bit harder as we move along, but this team has already shown so much in terms of what they are capable of that I'm really not all that concerned for them. I really trust this core of players, and I really trust the form that they're currently in, and I think it's going to carry them very, very far. And the player that has definitely epitomized and embodied the success that this team has been on over the course of this split so far absolutely has to be JackeyLove in the AD carry position. Again, I went on that whole tangent earlier about how Wayward, Tian, Mark, like, they don't deserve to be discredited because JackeyLove is good, but we also don't deserve to discredit JackeyLove because the rest of the players are, pretty decent LPL players. JackeyLove is playing, like, easily the best player in the LPL right now. This is legitimately one of the single best LPL weeks from one player that I've ever watched. He played, like 7, 8, 9 games this week, and he dominated all of them, like, literally every single one. He was the best player in all of them, and so, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about JackeyLove. 3 games of Aphelios in this series, and he looks like an absolute monster. Pretty easy choice for player of the series here for Top Esports. Just continues on his absolute warpath. I expect him to continue to be one of the best AD carries. We know he can be that over the course of an entire split. Go back and look at 2019. Go back and look at even parts of last year, right, where he was really, really good for extended periods of time. We know that JackeyLove has it in him. It's just really, really good to see him be able to bring it out on a team that didn't necessarily look like it was going to get it out of him throughout most of this year, and so Really, really good stuff. I'd be repeating myself. I've already talked about him a lot this week, so I want to talk about Rookie because he also had a really good series. A little bit of a hiccup in game number 2. We'll talk about Tong Yuan in a second, who had a very good game too, but he dominated games 1 and 3, and really is back on track. I feel pretty good about Rookie again, which is a very good thing to say. I know a lot of people are still a little bit hesitant when it comes to him because of the performances that we've seen over the course of this year in particular, but he's shown just about everything that you can show up until this point to make me feel good that Rookie is back, that it's not some sort of illusion. This is the real Rookie, and he's going to be a major threat. This very much feels like 2019 Invictus Gaming all over again. Tian fills a very similar void to what someone like Ning did on that team. Of course, Mark, compare him to Baolan. I think they're very similar players. The only difference is that I think Wayward and the Shy couldn't be more different, not just because of playstyle, but I think that Wayward is significantly more consistent than the Shy was in 2019, even though the Shy was probably in peak form right around that time, and so you maybe not get the same kind of high highs that team was getting out of their top laner, but you might not need to if JackeyLove's going to be playing the best League of Legends that he has played in his entire career, and so basically just good things to say about top esports, and especially with how they've been playing recently. But for RNG on the other side, could have been worse, really could have been worse. This is a team that does feel like they are relatively competitive, even against teams that are really feeling themselves right now, like Top Esports on the other side of the map. There are some problems, especially with some of the younger players, the less experienced players on this team. I think there are definitely some questions to be raised, and even some of the experienced players aren't playing well every single game. Cough, cough, breathe in game number 1, but my dud of the series is going to go to LP. It really did feel like a little bit of a bot gap in this series, and that's okay. Again, LP's not supposed to be able to stand up to JackeyLove in terms of individual skill. It's good to see him be able to at least do things on the map, but he was clearly the least effective player for both of these teams across this entire series, and I don't think it was particularly close. At least Lumao had some decent engages. Tong Yuan was really good in game number 2 on the Annie to be able to set up a lot of plays specifically for Wei on that Kha'Zix in the jungle, and then, I've actually added a little bit of a graphic here. Not gonna do this for every series, obviously, as you've already seen, but look at how many repeat picks that we have throughout this series. There were no variations in bans. This was basically a copy-paste pick ban phase for all 3 games, which is pretty intriguing to see from these two teams. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Both teams having a pretty decent idea of how they want to play the game, I guess, but Top Esports just coming out on top, I think, due to sheer talent difference alone. But overall, RNG, I think, looks fine. Like I said, Tong Yuan and Wei looked really good in game number 2, but the rest of the team, not so much. Breathe was a disaster in game 1 on the Scion, and LP and Lumao just never really had any sort of pressure on the bot side of the map. LP definitely not dealing any damage in this series, which is always going to be at least a little bit of a problem for an AD carry, and so RNG still with a couple of problems, but at the very least kept up in pace a little bit, which is probably better than you could say for them last split. And then Top Esports is just really good. 7-1 absolutely defines how this team is playing right now. This is not a phony 7-1 team. This is a very real 7-1 team and a world caliber team right now. I wasn't joking when I said earlier in the vid that I could absolutely see this team taking the LPL trophy by the end of the split. I think that that's a very realistic possibility if things continue to move in this kind of direction. And that's going to bring us to our final series of the video here, and it's the one that I think most people were looking forward to the most here in week number 3, a matchup between the 2 best teams in the world potentially right now, JD Gaming taking on Bilibili Gaming. And JDG took it 2-0 without really any sort of problem. We were kind of hoping for an interesting series here, BLG. We were hoping that 6-0 record and that run at MSI, making MSI finals, was going to mean that maybe this was the time you finally got over that hump. But no, JDG's got your number, they've got you pinned down, and they definitely know how to beat you because JDG is just looking so fantastic. What a ridiculous series coming out from this team, and I gotta highlight the bot lane. Ruler and Missing, absolutely absurd performance coming out from both of them. I love hyping up Elkanon as much as anybody because I've been on the hype train for both of these players longer than pretty much anybody else, especially on, but even Elk, someone that I've been very passionate about for much longer than I think the general consensus, but man, they got slaughtered in this series. It was not close. Ruler and Missing were out to make a statement, and a statement they made. They are the best bot lane in the world. Gumayushi Keria, move aside. Elkanon, not even close. Pays and Delight, it's not even in the competition. Ruler and Missing are the best bot lane in the world, and they really showed it off in this series. Ruler's going to get my player of the series for JD Gaming, but you could very realistically give this to the support as well. The Rakan setups absolutely amazing. Ruler pulling out the Kaisa in game number 2 and dealing a bajillion damage on it, making that pick look incredibly busted in a meta where most people see Kaisa as incredibly underpowered compared to what a lot of the rest of the AD carries are able to put out. Just crazy stuff coming out from the bot lane. Only praise. That's the only thing I can heap upon these two players because they did basically everything they needed to do. If Ruler's going to play like this and deal this amount of damage, if Missing's going to play like the best support in the entire world like he did in this series, JDG is going to be an impossible team to beat. The Golden Road's going to be a cakewalk for them because really, when you have these two playing like this, it is a no-brainer. Everybody else also played well. 369 was definitely better in the top lane. Kanavi and Knight have very good synergy and were great secondary carries in this series. Knight in particular did a ridiculous amount of damage on that Ahri in game number 2, but really, it was about the bot lane. That was the story here. And then for BLG on the other side, they did kind of get rolled here. Their first loss of the split in terms of series, and it was not a particularly close one. You would hope this team would have put up at least a little bit of a fight, but it really does feel like JDG just kind of has their number, which is never really what you want to see. I talked about the bot diff. That is absolutely true. My dud of the series is going to go to On. As much as I love him when you play Thresh, when you play Blitzcrank and it does not work out, you look completely and utterly useless. Because what are you supposed to do? Not engage? That's your entire kit. Like, yes, you have a little bit of peel. You can sit on the backline, but Elk was also really far behind. The Aphelios was really never in a position to deal damage either, and so not a great situation for BLG to be in. I don't know if I've ever seen this bot lane duo lose as hard as they did in this game, and that's just credit over to JDG. It's not a negative on the side of BLG, but everybody else also lost. Yagao, not necessarily as bad as the rest. I would say that he probably performed the best of anybody in this series, if only because he didn't make as many major mistakes, but still, Ahri, Talia, you gotta get out on the map, you gotta get moving. That Talia is that signature pick of his that he really dominated on last year for this JD Gaming team, and just wasn't meant to be. June, Bin, they're fine, right? Bin got beat in the top lane. 369 was definitely better in this series, and June just really couldn't get anything done on the Vi. It's a very difficult pick to play into a jungler who knows how to operate the early game as well as Kanavi does, because if Vi does get behind, I talk about this all the time, she's just significantly less useful than basically any other jungler in the league, and so BLG definitely, some things to worry about, but it's JD Gaming. This team just seems to have some sort of magic voodoo curse over them, and so I'm not going to try to overthink this. It's going to be interesting to see how they bounce back, though, in their next series. And then for JDG, this is exactly what I wanted to see. This is why they're number 1, right? They're the number 1 team in the world until proven otherwise, because every time they're actually tested, every time they go up against a team that they truly believe they have to pay attention to, they slaughter them. They look like the best team in the world, and they look like it by a ginormous margin. Ruler and Missing are goated. Knight is maybe the third best player on this team right now. Kanavi and 369 are like fighting for worst player on the team. Like, how absurd is that we are in that position? JD Gaming is a cheat code, and they showed it again in this series. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LPL Week 3 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see my updated power rankings. You're going to see the standings as well. Of course, that's probably the more noticeable part, I would say, of the graphic up on the screen. Any ties will just be broken alphabetically in terms of the standings. But in the first column to the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings. In the second column, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. We can go over some of the risers and the fallers. Not a lot of changes this week. In the top 10, there's only one. OMG jumping back up to number 6 with EDG falling down to number 7. I know that EDG has had a really rough schedule to start the split. They basically only played strong teams up until this point, but until they can prove they can win games, I'm just not going to be able to put them again above a team like OMG, who I think has proven that they, at the very least, can win games. That's what you want to see out of them, and so OMG jumps up to 6, but no other changes in the top 10. Everybody else staying exactly where they were. I feel pretty good about my rankings at that point. And then in the bottom half, just a couple of movers. Rare Atom and Ultra Prime going to be jumping up to 11 and 12. They feel like the most consistent non-playoff teams right now, which is insane to say because they're not consistent at all. In fact, I think their rosters are bad, but everybody 11 and down is bad. Like, there really is no explanation for how that ends up working. There is nobody in that range that I feel even remotely comfortable about, which should be highlighted by the fact that ThunderTalk and Invictus only dropped to 13 and 14, both of whom have only won one series this entire split up until this point. Anyone's Legend, FPX, LGD, neither of them feel all that good, and so the bottom of the standings, like the bottom 7-ish teams, put them in any order you want. None of them are good right now, and it's really hard to distinguish between them. I trust, I guess, Rare Atom the most because of their talent level, and then Ultra Prime because they've actually won some series against some bad teams this split so far, but I mean, that's it. That's really the differentiator, right? ThunderTalk and Invictus should be better, so I guess they're 13-14, and then bottom 3 feel pretty locked to me right now, but Really, put them in any order you want. Not a lot of changes this week because really not a lot of things went against the grain, I guess you could say. And then my player of the week and my dud of the week here in week number 3. Player of the week is just such a no-brainer. You don't need me to tell you. It's Jackie Love. It's Jackie Love, the AD carry for Top Esports. The dude dominated every single game that he played this week. You're going to be hard-pressed to find a player who played better over the course of a week's time than what Jackie Love did here in week 3 of the summer split. Just an absolute massacre of every team that he played against. Really, really fun stuff. There were a couple of other options, but really at the end of the day, it was Jackie Love's award to win. And then dud of the week was also a relatively easy one for me, although there were quite a few choices, a lot of bad teams this week, but my dud of the week is going to go to Yao Yao on ThunderTalk. The support for them, just a really bad week. A player that I really like and that I've hyped up a lot on this channel in the past, not performing well. He played bad in basically every game that he played, and then he got benched for Yu Yanja, which is just never a good sign, but he was pretty miserable, and ThunderTalk looked atrocious across the entire week, and so Yao Yao's going to get my dud of the week in week number 3, and Jackie Love is going to get my player of the week in week number 3, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comment section below. Who am I overrating? Who am I underrating? Love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions down there. Of course, if you did enjoy the video, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. Of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Not only do we post about the LPL every single week on this channel, but we post about all 4 of the major regions as well as the NACL. So if you're interested in comprehensive League of Legends analysis for esports, this is the place for it. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.